Meet Gizlin, the firstborn son of the Perdium family, a noble house teetering on the edge of ruin. Every servant in the estate trembled in his presence, and for good reason. He was the cursed heir, infamous for a temper as venomous as poison. One day, crushed by the scorn of his own blood, Gizlin chose exile over disgrace, leaving the family before they could cast him out. He forged a new path in blood and steel as a mercenary, and over the long years carved out a legendary and fearsome reputation. His power grew so immense, he was hailed as one of the continent's 7 champions. But with greatness came clarity, and Gizlin finally saw the monster he had once been. And so he journeyed back to his homeland, seeking the forgiveness he never gave. But what awaited him was not home, but the ashes of his kingdom and the cold truth of a devastating betrayal. Years later, after a cataclysmic war finally drew to a close, Gizlin, the Mercenary King, faced his final defeat. The noble swordsman Eden declared the long war was over. Asked for his final words, Gizlin confessed his one lingering regret, the vengeance he would never claim. With a cold smirk, Eden granted his wish for death, sneering, "Gizlin, your arrogance was always your downfall." Then Eden's words took a chilling turn, speaking of a boy who abandoned his family after his sister's tragic death. Gizlin demanded to know how he knew such a secret. Eden admitted he'd spent years unearthing every shadow of Gizlin's past. And then came the final soul-shattering confession. His own family had conspired with the House of Dolphin to orchestrate the Perdium family's complete annihilation. In that moment, Gizlin's world shattered. The plot was far deeper and darker than he could have ever imagined. Eden dismissed the conversation for a dead man's knowledge was meaningless. But for Gizlin, a firestorm of pure, untamed fury ignited within his soul. And with a final strike, Eden vanquished the legendary Mercenary King. But as darkness claimed him, something felt wrong. This wasn't death. He was young again, his life flashing before his eyes, haunted by the memory of the sister who died, while he was just a worthless, arrogant brat. Gizlin's eyes shot open. He was in his old room. Staring at his youthful hands, he was certain he had just died on the battlefield. An agonizing pain ripped through his body so intense he almost wished he'd stayed dead. Just then, the door creaked open. A maid rushed in her face, alight with joy to see the young master had finally awakened. But when Gizlin saw her face, the face of Belinda, his world froze in utter disbelief. She fretted over him, saying he should have left the orcs to the knights. But her words were cut short as he lunged forward, pulling her into a desperate tight embrace. Stunned, she stammered, asking what was wrong. Belinda had been his personal tutor, the only person who had ever tolerated his monstrous behavior to the very end. After his family fell, she had vanished without a trace, a ghost in his memories. Until now. She couldn't grasp his relief, reminding him they saw each other daily. Gizlin knew he had to make her understand. With a grave intensity in his eyes, he warned her that a great disaster was about to befall their house, leaving her utterly baffled. But there was more. He had to tell her the impossible truth. Gizlin confessed he had returned from death itself, a claim Belinda simply brushed off as the result of his head injury. She then turned his words back on him, asking if he realized the only disaster here was his own recklessness. The familiar scolding began, but he barely heard it. Belinda then asked what would happen if his injuries kept him from the upcoming festival. At that word festival, his blood ran cold. Belinda reminded him that his sister Helena was desperately looking forward to him taking her. She saw it as a chance for the estranged siblings to finally reconcile. Gizlin's mind raced. He remembered a festival from this exact time of year. In his first life blinded by his own rage and selfishness, he had missed his last chance to be with her. The festival, she said, was in just 1 week. 1 week. The timeline sent a chill down his spine. Just then, another voice echoed from the doorway. Turning to the sound he'd only heard in his nightmares, Gizlin's heart pounded. All his life, he had been tormented by this inescapable regret. And in 1 week, the owner of that voice, his sister, was fated to die. Without a second thought, Gizlin ran and threw his arms around her. Helena was completely shocked, assuming it was just another one of her brother's cruel pranks. But Gizlin could only whisper how much he had missed her. Annoyed, she shoved him away, telling him he was being creepy. Stumbling back, Gizlin was surprised by her strength. With a sigh, Helena declared this little act wouldn't change what he'd done. He was confused until she reminded him of the vicious, unforgivable words he had hurled at her just recently, words that still cut her deeply. The crushing realization hit him. In this past, he and his sister weren't just distant, they were practically enemies. He was the villain in her life. Overwhelmed with his past sins, he offered a sincere, heartfelt apology. The two girls stared, convinced his head injury was making him act insane. But Gizlin's pride flared, insisting he had crushed the orcs, not the other way around, before a jolt of pain silenced him. Watching him crumble, Helena smirked, remarking that he was probably dragged back to the mansion unconscious. At that, both girls burst into laughter. For a single precious moment, Gizlin watched them, a sight he thought he'd lost forever. A faint smile touched his lips. The faces before him were a perfect memory. In his past life, he'd used a failed trip as a pathetic excuse to skip the festival. That was the last time he ever saw his sister alive. She was tragically lost, taken along with all her bodyguards. And Gizlin carried the crushing weight of not being by her side. Just then, a sharp knock echoed from the door. 2 guards entered searching for Helena. They bowed apologetically, explaining that she was needed to oversee the festival preparations. Gizlin immediately questioned why they were burdening Helena with such tasks. Belinda explained that with the staff stretched so thin, even a noble lady like Helena had to pitch in. Looking at his sister now, he realized a painful truth. In the past, he was simply too self-absorbed to notice her struggles. Abruptly, he offered his assistance. At his words, Helena spun around in pure shock. The other girls exchanged glances, certain that Gizlin's head injury had been far more serious than they thought. As they walked, the festival noise was a chaotic roar. Helena flatly refused his help, admitting that no one could possibly work with him around. A chilling memory surfaced for Gizlin. Helena's body had been found far from the festival grounds. That meant she had been dragged away from here. To prevent her abduction, he first needed to map out every entrance and exit in the castle. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice approaching. The moment Gizlin saw the man, recognition hit him like a tidal wave. It was Fergus, his old attendant, panting as he hurried over. The old man explained he rushed over the instant he heard about the detachment. Helena added that Gizlin was acting strangely and Fergus should probably take him back. Gizlin sighed inwardly. It was clear he'd have to gather his information bit by bit without raising more suspicion. He then made a request asking the old man to guide him to an abandoned training ground. When Fergus asked why, the young master calmly replied, "I'm going to train." The old man's eyes widened in surprise, but when he led Gizlin to the location, it was the boy's turn to be stunned. The place was far better than he could have ever imagined. It was the perfect training ground, a hidden gem he'd never found in all his brutal years as a mercenary. The loyal attendant confessed they had been preparing the area because Fergus had faith that Gizlain's troubles would eventually pass. A wave of melancholy washed over Gizlin. Fergus had always been this devoted even in his past life. The thought brought a familiar ache to his heart. He replied quietly that he intended to live a long life, that death was no longer an option for him. His words made Fergus feel as if the boy had already stared into that abyss. With a hollow tone, Gizlin shot back, I died and was reborn." Fergus dismissed it as a grim joke, so Gizlin simply bid him farewell. He reflected on his past self, always hostile to those who cared, always blind to their loyalty. But now his eyes were wide open. He had exactly 1 week before the world began to crumble. They would later discover a neighboring feudal lord was behind Helena's assassination. Because of that one act, Perdium was plunged into a disastrous war it would ultimately lose. Gizlin knew Helena's death was the linchpin of fate, and this time, he would be the one to pull it out. He decided to start by reforging his own body despite the short time he had. Gizlin was determined to reopen the path of mana. Mana, a supernatural power that allowed mortals to shatter their physical limits. Releasing and gathering mana was a legendary feat for most, but for Gizlin, it was second nature. Something he could do even in the heart of a chaotic battle. All he had to do was feel the ambient mana particles and draw them into a single point. For a warrior who had survived tens of thousands of battles forming a mana core was easy. But that alone was not what made Gizlin one of the continent's strongest fighters. His true power came from a forbidden method he'd discovered in an ancient grimoire. A technique that allowed him to create multiple mana cores. All three were intricately linked. While it could have restored his former power, his current body could barely handle the immense strain. In his past life, he had forged 5 cores. But in this weak young body, 3 was his absolute limit. This method granted explosive growth in power, but the cost was an insatiable demand for mana. This very weakness was why he lost to Eden. He was ambushed at his most vulnerable moment when his mana was completely drained. The technique was a double-edged sword, far from reliable. But for now, it would be more than enough. With the body of his youth and a wealth of time ahead, he swore to sever Idun's head and crush the Dolphin family and all their lackeys. Gizlin was going to annihilate them all. A week later, the festival began. He appeared at the gates fully armed and found Helena, who stared at him in disbelief. She found it incredibly strange that her reclusive brother would attend such an event for the very first time. But he had to be there as a representative of their family. Helena noted he seemed different, already aware he'd been training relentlessly all week. The young man asked what was so wrong with training in the family's arts, but Helena reminded him he'd scorned those very traditions not long ago. Gizlin was caught off guard when she recalled his arrogant declaration about becoming a lord without needing such ceremonies. With a warm smile, Helena confessed that these changes in her brother made her happy. It was as if the old kind Gizlin had finally returned. Hearing her words, the young man was shocked into silence. In that 1 week, he had indeed unearthed a crucial piece of his forgotten past. His every action sent ripples across the fabric of time. The present and the future were no longer set in stone. The grand tapestry of destiny would likely remain, but the smaller threads were now dangerously unpredictable. Forced to rely on his future knowledge, he crafted the perfect strategy for every threat. He steeled his resolve for the chaos about to unfold. He spent the quiet hours of the night with Helena as she explored the street food stalls. For a little while, he was just a brother following wherever his sister led. Helena found delight in everything, even a festival that had long since grown stale and repetitive. But a gnawing unease settled in Gizlin's heart. The festival was almost over, yet the disaster he foresaw hadn't struck. Then the whispers of treachery reached his ears. Knights approached speaking of a thrilling new entertainment nearby. Eager for more excitement, Helena immediately agreed to go. In that instant, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Gizlin. His family had been nurturing vipers. Philip and Jamal, the two men entrusted with Helena's life since her birth. The knights guided Helena to the supposed location, but it was nothing more than a dark, desolate alley. Helena looked around utterly confused. How could anyone find joy in such a grim, forgotten place? Jamal smoothly urged them to be patient, promising the main event would begin at any moment. But Helena felt a prickle of fear. This was all wrong. Ignoring them completely, Gizlin's mind was already racing. It seemed like an ordinary alley, but he had already spotted the blockades. Every single escape route was sealed. His sister's voice snapped him back to reality. Fed up, she grabbed Gizlin's arm, ready to storm out of there. He was surprised by her unexpected strength, but with her eyes on him, she didn't see the figure that stepped into her path. Philip moved to block them, asking Helena to wait just a little longer. But seeing the twisted, unnatural smile on his face, the girl grew afraid. "You're both acting so weird," she said. "What's wrong with you?" Jamal sneered, claiming they didn't mean to frighten her. They simply had a small request. A true chill ran down Helena's spine. Just then, a new figure emerged from the shadows, flanked by two hooded men. The newcomer Frank nodded with satisfaction. "A clean job, just as I expected." Jamal boasted they had delivered as promised, so it was time to seal the deal. But Frank's gaze shifted, landing on the silent boy beside Helena. He recognized Gizlin instantly. "He's not part of the deal. I didn't hire you for him." "Consider him a free bonus," Jamal sneered. That's when Gizlin finally spoke, his voice like ice. "What makes you think you have the right to trade our lives?" The traitorous knight simply scoffed, telling Gizlin to worry about himself. They were just going to take the money and leave. He then admitted they were sick of serving in these poor, worthless lands, a place everyone else was already fleeing. Gizlin had heard enough of the traitor's monologue. In a flash, he unleashed the beast he had hidden for so long. Blood erupted from Jamal's lips as he let out a choked gasp. Everyone else froze, stunned by the blindingly fast assault. As the traitor's body was cleaved in two, Gizlin's cold voice cut through the silence. "At least the others didn't sell human lives." His chilling gaze then fell upon Philip. Terrified, the knight grabbed Helena as a human shield, his hand fumbling for his sword. But Gizlin was already moving, a single lethal flash of steel, and the second traitor fell before he could even draw his blade. With his last breath, all he could gasp was, "Impossible!" Before his lifeless body crumpled to the ground. The bandits began to mutter in disbelief. The eldest son of the Perdium family had never even trained with a sword, but their leader knew. There was no mistaking the chilling aura of the boy standing before them. Even if those knights were caught off guard, the boy's speed and precision were simply monstrous. Helena, trembling with fear, demanded to know what was happening. Gizlin offered no reply. With a swift, precise chop to her neck, he gently put her to sleep. He caught her falling form, laying her carefully aside. A voice sneered, "Thanks for taking out our trash." Only then did Gizlin turn. "We were planning to kill those two anyway," the man chuckled. "You're nothing like the rumors," he added. "You've been hiding your true skills all this time, haven't you?" Gizlin raised his sword, its edge gleaming under the moonlight. "And what does that have to do with you?" His mind calculated coldly 3 opponents left. The 2 lackeys behind the leader were insignificant, but the leader himself radiated a monstrous, suffocating mana. Because of that immense power, Gizlin knew this fight had to end swiftly. He demanded to know who gave the order, but the thief just laughed. "Dead men don't need answers." Gizlin wasn't surprised. But that only hardened his resolve. He would force the truth from this man before he died. The man gave a cruel order to his minions. "Capture him alive, but break his limbs. I want him to go mad from utter helplessness." With a twisted grin, the man declared that to forge a true masterpiece, you must first be sculpted by agony. The moment the order was given, the 2 thugs shot forward like arrows. But Gizlin stood before them, a storm of eerie calm, his movements fluid and precise. As the assassins charged, he flung a small object directly into their path. The thug instantly recognized the firecracker, but in that split second of confusion, a fist slammed squarely into his face. Bypassing the firecracker, Gizlain's blade plunged deep into the thug's skull. At the same time, the other assassin closed in from his blind spot. He swung for a killing blow, but Gizlaine parried it with expert precision. The instant their blades locked, Gizlin twisted the man's arm and seized his weapon. He spun around, brandishing his own sword in the other hand. A flash of silver, and the second thief's head tumbled to the ground. But even as his enemy fell, a sharp whistle pierced the air from above. With his subordinates defeated, their leader finally descended from the shadows to intervene. Reacting to the sudden ambush, Ghislaine's blade met the attack with a deafening crash. The leader's eyes widened in shock. How could the boy have blocked an attack from a perfect blind spot? Gizlin instantly spun into a counterattack. Lost in his own confusion, the man never saw the blade that sliced into his neck. Blood sprayed from the gash, his favorite pipe clattering to the ground in 2 pieces. But even so, the man's deadly strike never wavered. Sensing the overwhelming danger, the young man threw up his blade in a desperate defense. The leader's lips curled into a smirk. He could feel the power in that block. If not for mana, the boy's head would have been sent flying. Gizlin realized it instantly. The man had shielded his body with mana to prevent a fatal wound. The assassin had no clue how a mere kid acquired such skill, but he swore on his life that Gizlin would die tonight. In that instant, a sinister mana began to swirl around him. As he charged, his voice dripped with arrogance. "With your pathetic mana reserves, you cannot win." A cruel excitement flashed in his eyes as he imagined the kill. But in response to the taunt, a faint smile spread across Gizlain's face. That smile made the man's blood run cold. In that moment of doubt, the young man moved effortlessly, dodging and deflecting the incoming blade. Exploiting the opening, he slammed a powerful kick into the assassin's chest. The blow sent the man staggering back several meters. Despite the setback, he sneered, confident in his assessment of his opponent's power. "With your mana reserves, it's impossible," he roared. But as the words left his lips, blood suddenly gushed from his throat. Agonizing pain sent the man to his knees, coughing violently. The boy's kick wasn't that strong, but it had somehow shattered his mana reinforcement. As Gizlin slowly approached, his voice was dangerously calm. "I never imagined there was a conspiracy behind my sister's death." His eyes blazed with an inferno of rage. "Now, I'm going to find out who was pulling the strings." Gizlin was ready to end him right here and now. The thief felt an unbelievable surge of mana erupting from the boy, leaving him utterly stunned. But his thoughts were cut short as the young man vanished, reappearing right before his eyes. The assassin had to admit his opponent was impossibly fast. He barely parried the relentless storm of attacks as the fight raged on. Then Gizlin unleashed one final devastating blow. He poured all his power into a two-handed strike, slamming his swords down on the assassin's blade. The leader's arms trembled, struggling to hold on against the sheer force. Cracks began to spiderweb across his sword. He had never witnessed such an overwhelming torrent of mana in his life. It was as if Gizlin had transformed into a completely different person. With one more crushing impact, the man's sword exploded into 1,000 shards. The undefended attack sliced deep, delivering a mortal wound. Blood erupted from the gaping wound, but that wasn't enough for Gizlin. He raised his sword to strike again. He plunged his blade mercilessly into the now defenseless thief. The man screamed in agony as the steel pierced his body, but Gizlin simply grabbed his throat and slammed him against the wall. Then he calmly invited the man to talk. His eyes like ice, Gizlin demanded to know who had ordered the hit. But the thief refused to surrender, pulling a hidden dagger with his last ounce of strength. His true target wasn't the sleeping Helena, but Gizlin himself. If he was going down, he was taking this monster with him. But just as he lunged, his arm froze in midair. Trapped by a spell, the man heard Gizlaine's cold proposition. "Stop this foolishness and start talking," Gizlain promised. "And I might consider sheathing my sword." The thief finally saw them, threads of pure mana binding his body. He had no idea when Gizlain had set this trap. He'd been caught from the very beginning. Clutching the sword in his gut, the thief taunted him. "A great warrior like you can surely heal these wounds." But the young man knew the truth. A simple wound could be healed, but everything ends once the mana core is shattered. The thief's blood ran cold. A searing agony tore through his soul as a terrifying crack began to splinter across his very being. But true horror seized him as his mana began to vanish. The man's warning echoed in his mind. One false step, and that power would unleash total annihilation. "Amateurs die," Gizlin sneered, "but I will find a way." The man knew instantly this was no empty threat. Staring into those eyes, he saw a vision of his own grave. Gripped by terror, he betrayed his master, the very count who had ordered Helena's execution. He confessed the whole twisted plot by Count Desmond to ignite a war. But Gizlin remained utterly unfazed. In his previous life, all the dirty work fell to the Duke's allied families. "Is that why you need Helena?" Gizlin probed, and the man confirmed his darkest suspicions. But as he did, Gizlin plunged the sword even deeper. Coughing up blood, the man choked. "Why, you broke our agreement." A low, chilling chuckle escaped Gizlin's lips. "You've killed countless people yourself. Yet now, facing your own end, you've become a pathetic coward." The dying man was shocked to hear nothing but laughter in response. He spat that his death would change nothing, that the degrades issue was already settled. But Gizlin ruthlessly silenced his final words, then decided to grant him one last piece of the truth. The young master chuckled, revealing he'd been reborn after death. "And this time," he hissed, "everything will be different." The moment he finished speaking, he unleashed another wave of searing pain. Just as he'd declared, mana erupted violently. But Gizlin stood at its center, completely unharmed. Gasping for breath, Gizlin turned his head. There he saw Helena deeply asleep on the cold floor. Tossing the sword aside, he leaned his head back and let out a heavy sigh. But in that same instant, he felt blood surge up his throat. Gizlin collapsed to his knees, vomiting blood. He cursed. This newfound power had never caused such a violent backlash before. Staring at the door ahead, he swore he wouldn't fall so easily. Bursting in, he was met with a gruesome scene and another body. Gizlin went straight for it, knowing this corpse would be here, and if the thief's final words held any truth, then Gizlin knew exactly who it was. Lying before him was the son of House Degrade. Examining the bodies, the truth became terrifyingly clear. They were all murdered and framed as Helena's killers. If their deaths were revealed now, war would be inevitable. And so Gizlin decided to erase all the evidence. After setting the entire building ablaze, Gizlin grabbed his sister and vanished into the night. However, as they escaped, a figure watched from the shadows ready to report everything. Soon enough, the news spread like wildfire. The mission was a complete failure. Insults rained down upon the thieves, but the spy desperately tried to defend himself. He explained that Gizlin himself had stopped Helena from being killed. Hearing that name, the room filled with scorn. Everyone knew him as the useless idiot of the family. Someone scoffed that everyone knew what Gizlin was, so the story made no sense. But the spy furiously objected, insisting the man he saw was nothing like the rumors. The reality of the man was a world apart from the gossip. In fact, the spy suspected it was an entirely different soul inside the boy's body. He quickly changed the subject back to the degrades, saying a war could still be provoked. The spy begged for another chance, but they saw only a failure and prepared to dispose of him. Suddenly, an imposing voice cut through the commotion. The man asked what kind of chance he needed. Then he made a chilling promise he would get rid of Gizlin himself. He declared he would personally fight the boy, boasting of an ace up his sleeve. A murmur spread through the room. They were talking about Cain Lodge as a famed master of the sword. And as fate would have it, Cain was Gizlin's very own cousin. It would be easy to pit the two against each other. The room was stunned into silence until the one with the highest authority finally spoke. The man delivered a grave warning. If this plan failed, there would be no next chance. Arriving at the training center, Fergus intended to invite the young master to lunch. But suddenly, he was blinded by a brilliant light. A flash of light had erupted, engulfing a practice sword that was leaning against the wall. Then, the sword began to float into the training hall. But Gizlin effortlessly snatched it out of the air. He gave it a few swings, thinking it wasn't half bad for a simple blade. It was then that he sensed someone had entered the room. Fergus apologized for interrupting his training, but he couldn't help but ask, "Young master, how in the world did you just do that?" After asking what he meant, Gizlin simply demonstrated his newfound skill once more. He explained that he used mana threads, weaving his energy into a tangible pulling force. He'd used them before, but it used to take all his strength to control them. But now, if Gizlin used just one concentrated thread, he could achieve the same powerful result. Fergus was astounded. He thought he knew much about mana training, but he'd never witnessed anything like this. He reflected on how Gizlin had neglected his mana for years, yet now displayed such incredible and refined control. But then he remembered why he had come. Fergus bowed deeply and thanked the young man for saving Lady Helena. Gizlin, however, remained unfazed. He simply did what was necessary. Helena confessed that no one believed Gizlin was her savior. She had pleaded with her brother to spread the truth, but he coldly refused. Belinda's anger simmered. She knew those two knights were suspicious from the very beginning. Gizlin sensed Helena was hiding something significant. Still, he had achieved his goal, buying precious time by delaying the inevitable war. But Gizlin knew he couldn't face this threat alone. He needed an army. As a maid entered with food, his mind raced. To build an army, he would need overwhelming power. But his grand ambitions were interrupted by a simple piece of bread. For a moment, Gizlin just stared at the humble offering. He wryly asked Belinda if this was dessert, but her reply was a stark reminder of their poverty. Suddenly, a furious shout erupted from outside. "Compensation!" A man bellowed in the streets, his voice filled with rage over the canceled festival. And he was not alone. An entire mob of furious citizens stood ready to riot. They roared with anger, certain the Count's family was hoarding wealth. Peering through the window, Gizlin watched in horror as chaos descended. Belinda sighed, confessing she saw this coming. Their merchants depended on these festivals. Last year's event had made them fortunes. But this year, it was canceled after a single day. Their fury was explosive. The sheer weight of the crisis crashed down on Gizlin. He knew inaction would only fuel the fire. With resolve, he ordered Fergus and the soldiers to control the mob. The old man returned a weary smile, stating, "What soldiers?" He explained that most of their men were deep in the forest hunting down the last of the orcs. Their domain was trapped between two evil's relentless invaders on one side and a monster-infested forest on the other. Gizlin's frustration boiled over. No soldiers and no money. He turned to Belinda, his voice grim. "We need to talk." He demanded to know why she hadn't used his funds to appease the merchants. But the girl's answer was chillingly simple. The money was gone. A smirk played on her lips. She reminded him of the Count's decree forbidding him from touching any funds after his past recklessness. The words hit him like a physical blow. The horrifying truth settled in. He was completely and utterly broke. He desperately asked to borrow from Belinda, but her pockets were just as empty. After a pitiful meal, Gizlin sat alone, realizing they had truly hit rock bottom. At this rate, even with his knowledge of the future, he was utterly helpless. As despair settled in, the silence was shattered. A knight burst through the door, his face a mask of terror, letting out a piercing scream. Gizlin launched himself from the window ledge. "What is it?" he demanded. Ricardo gasped for breath. "We have a situation. Cain is here. He's demanding to see you." At the sound of that name, Gizlin's eyes widened with shock. His guards were barely holding the line. And at the center of the chaos, Commander Scoven was taking the full force of Kane's rage. The assault was so brutal, Kane's fists were drenched in the commander's blood. But he didn't even seem to notice. He just continued his merciless assault, each blow powerful enough to shatter Scoven's armor. By the time Gizlin arrived, Scoven was a broken mess. Seeing the young lord, a tremor ran through him, a mix of relief and agony. Gizlin was stunned by the sheer brutality. A cold voice cut through the air, forcing him to tear his eyes away from the wounded commander. And there he was, Kane, an intimidating figure who towered over him. Looking down with a cold gaze, Kane offered a greeting. Gizlin returned the greeting, his voice flat. He remembered his cousin's face all too well. He was the heir to the Allied Lodge territory, and even as a youth, Kane was a warrior of exceptional talent. Once Kane had been Gizlin's only friend. But the truth was far darker. They were rivals. With deliberate steps, Kane closed the distance between them. "Ricardo," Gizlin demanded, "explain this, now." The knight explained it started at a local tavern. They found Kane there, demanding to know if the rumors about Gizlin's new power were true. Commander Scoven tried to explain, but Kane cut him off, enraged. He accused the commander of lying directly to his face. And that rage, Ricardo concluded, led to the brutal scene you're witnessing now. Kane declared that Scoven should have told the truth about how Gizlin really defeated the orcs. This beating was his way of teaching the commander a lesson. But then he shifted the blame onto Gizlin, accusing him of starting the rumors in the first place. Gizlin remained silent. After all, he remembered this all too well. Kane had always treated him like a mere subordinate, a tool to be used. When Kane stirred up trouble, no one dared to utter a single complaint because Gizlane always bowed to his will. No one crossed Kane, especially not Gizlane, who was trapped in the shadow of his own inferiority. In fact, Kane's brazen arrogance was celebrated, seen as the perfect quality for a future heir. A bitter chuckle escaped Gizlane's lips. He remembered how he was condemned for the very same traits, all while Kane's eyes were locked onto him. Kane sneered, recalling how Gizlane used to cry out at the smallest threat. So he was shocked when the order came down, kill Gizlane. The reward for this betrayal, lifelong security for his entire family. Kane reminded them that Gizlane was also of the main bloodline. He couldn't just be erased without consequence. Their solution was insidious: propose a duel and stage a fatal accident. They called it a golden opportunity for Kane to rise, in order to kill his own flesh and blood. Kane hadn't foreseen this twist of fate, but without a shred of hesitation, he embraced the dark task. Kane guessed they wanted Gizlane gone because he was changing. The thought made him scoff, as if this weakling could ever truly transform. He approached Gizlane, his voice dripping with contempt, and demanded, "What is this pathetic display?" Kane declared his arrival meant it was time for Gizlane to pay his usual tribute. "Since we've already ruined the festival," Kane sneered, "why don't we make things a little more exciting?" He was certain they both shared the same twisted idea of fun. But for a moment, Gizlane was silent, lost in his own world. He couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Do you really mean that?" he asked, a flicker of something new in his eyes. He remembered the old days when Kane would show up demanding wine and women. Gizlane always paid, fearing the inevitable beating. But not anymore. His coin was his own now. And in that instant, Belinda's advice echoed in his mind. A sudden revelation struck him like lightning, leaving him stunned. The source of his new wealth had been standing before him this whole time. Kane was a walking piggy bank. But his strategic thoughts were shattered by a sharp, impatient voice. "You heard me bring it all," Kane barked. Gizlane calmly agreed, but on one condition. First, he said, "You need to pay your debts." A confused smirk spread across Kane's face. "Debts? What debts are you talking about?" "With interest," Gizlane stated coolly. "Your total comes to 1,000 gold pieces." Kane scoffed. "I thought we were family friends." But Gizlane's reply was like ice. "No, you were just using me as your doormat." Gizlane's voice hardened, demanding the money be paid now, or it would be taken by force. In that instant, the air itself grew heavy with tension. Nearby, Ricardo watched in disbelief. What had gotten into Gizlane to act so boldly? Kane shot to his feet, his aura flaring. "You're delusional if you think you can be this insolent. Don't tell me you believe those pathetic rumors of your victories." He clenched his fist knuckles, turning white. "Everyone knows you're just a useless weakling who talks big." With a roar, Kane lunged forward, but Gizlane remained perfectly calm, a statue in the storm, and sidestepped the punch with effortless grace. Kane swung again, a furious barrage that only met empty air. In that moment of blind rage, he left a fatal opening, and Gizlane struck like a cobra. The impact was immense. The force of the blow left Kane completely stunned. Gizlane pressed his advantage, launching another attack, but Kane recovered, blocking the kick. Then suddenly, Kane crumpled to the ground, howling in agony. One of Kane's lackeys rushed to his side, asking what was wrong. Gizlane scoffed, "Stop the theatrics! I saw you block it." But the man shouted at Gizlane to back away, furious at his brutality. As the crowd began to murmur, wondering about the commotion, Gizlane's eyes widened in realization. It was all a trap. He understood Kane's scheme now. Kane whispered, "Did I play my part well?" Kane was setting the stage, painting Gizlane as the aggressor. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he began to reach for something. This was all part of the mission. Fulfilling it would secure his backing, and was the perfect excuse to finally eliminate his pathetic cousin. He pulled a white glove from his coat, the formal challenge for a duel to the death. But before he could throw it, another glove slapped right across his face. Gizlin had beaten him to it, challenging him to a duel. Cain was utterly dumbfounded. Gizlin's voice rang out. "You dare attack me, humiliate me in public, and assault these people?" "Do you deny it?" Gizlin challenged. A heavy silence fell. Cain never imagined the idiot would be so eager to dig his own grave. Cain drew his sword, its steel glinting menacingly. "You will regret this," he snarled. But Gizlin stood before him, his composure unshaken. Then Gizlin turned to Ricardo and gave a startling order. "Bring all the merchants here. Tell them their lost fortunes are about to be recovered." The festival's abrupt end had soured everyone's mood. But with pockets full of unspent coin, they were restless. Gizlin decided to give them the greatest show of all. And just like that, the stage was set. Before a massive crowd of spectators, the duel for destiny began. Naturally, with a spectacle this grand, the betting began immediately. Cain seethed with rage. Gizlin had twisted his sacred duel into a cheap public circus. With a cold glare, he warned that his blade would show no mercy, even if Gizlin begged for his life. In response, there was only silence. It was a blatant trap, and that was exactly what Cain wanted. Gizlin simply urged him to begin, but as the crowd roared, a voice suddenly cut them off. The man shouted that the bet was completely unfair, a declaration that sent ripples of surprise through the audience. The bookie had to agree. Not a single person had wagered on Gizlin. For Gizlin himself, this was a bitter but expected truth. The crowd began to demand that at least one person show some faith and bet on him. Cain just laughed, declaring Gizlin was worthless, not even fit for the slave market. So instead, they'd bet on how many seconds he could survive. But then, a new pouch slammed onto the table. It was the defeated Scoven betting everything on Gizlin. A faint smirk touched Gizlin's lips. A moment later, another bag of gold appeared. Helena and Belinda had arrived, but seeing his sister in a maid's uniform sent a shockwave through Gizlin. The onlookers were equally stunned, murmuring, as they recognized the noble Lady Helena. Others told Helena she had done enough while Belinda tried to dissuade her. The thief scowled as he passed, and Cain grew visibly annoyed by the delay. When the duel could finally begin, Gizlin noted he was the elder, so it would be improper for him to strike first. With that, he drew his sword, its steel gleaming, as he settled into a battle stance. He then gave Cain permission to attack. Cain looked at him and frowned. It was a little late to start playing the respected elder, he sneered. In the blink of an eye, he lunged at Gizlin, but the young man met his cousin's attack with a sharp ring of steel. Cain snarled that he had stooped so low just to save his own skin. The sheer force of the blow sent Gizlin stumbling back. Cain pressed his advantage with a flurry of strikes, but his opponent dodged every single one. When Gizlin ducked low, Cain's kick whistled through empty air. The spectators were convinced. There was no way Gizlin could even withstand a single clean hit. Hearing their cheers, Cain chuckled with arrogance. But as Gizlin observed his cousin, his eyes narrowed in thought. Belinda was terrified, thinking the duel had to be stopped immediately. The thief, however, was thrilled that Gizlin was doomed, knowing Cain's strength was overwhelming. The moment Gizlin's stamina faltered, Cain would deliver the finishing blow. This was Cain's signature strategy, the very one that had secured all his previous victories. But amid the clash, Cain realized Gizlin's skills had sharpened. He spun his sword, gripping it by the blade like a club. As he brought it down, Gizlin blocked the heavy strike. Then, with a savage twist, Cain yanked his sword back. Gizlin, who was still locked on, was pulled forward against his will. With a roar, Cain hurled Gizlin high into the air. The audience gasped, watching in suspense, while Ricardo feared for the boy's life. Meanwhile, the thief was practically giddy, certain that Gizlin's end had come. Soaring through the air, Gizlin began his rapid descent. Yet his face remained eerily composed throughout the fall. As he landed, he declared that he had been lenient, but that Cain had finally crossed the line. In a single fluid motion, Gizlin closed the distance to his foe. He launched his attack before Cain even had a chance to block. In fact, Cain couldn't even track Gizlin's movements with his eyes. Even the bandit was stunned, realizing Gizlin had channeled mana into his legs to regain his footing. After the assault, the young man exhaled slowly. He stated that Cain was abysmal with a weapon, only winning by intimidating others with brute force. And for that, Gizlin vowed to open his eyes. Hearing this, Cain exploded into a furious rage. Unsure how this weakling could harm him, he swung his blade like a wild animal. Gizlin simply spun his body, delivering a powerful kick directly into Cain's side. He then used Cain's own arm as a springboard, launching into the air. He twisted, aiming to wound Cain before he even landed. Enraged, Cain thrust his sword up to impale him, but Gizlin reacted in an instant, dodging the blade. Then he stomped his foot down hard upon it. He pinned Cain's weapon to the ground, restricting his movements. With his sword hand free, he unleashed a devastating counterattack. His blade sliced across Cain's unprotected neck. For a brief moment, Gizlin stared coldly at his opponent, before blood began to seep from Cain's many new wounds. The crowd immediately erupted into chaos. They were completely stunned by this unbelievable turn of events. Helena proudly turned to Belinda and asked if the maid had seen that magnificent display. Scovin let out a quiet chuckle of satisfaction, but the thief was practically shaking with fury and frustration. Kane knew the wounds weren't deep. Gizlin clearly had the power to injure him far more severely. He couldn't fathom when this nobody had become so skilled. For a long moment, silence fell between the two fighters. Gizlin just stared silently at his cousin. Then, to Kane's utter disbelief, he tossed his sword to the side. He declared the difference in their strength wasn't so great, so he would fight with his bare hands. Naturally, this ultimate act of disrespect sent Kane into an uncontrollable rage. But Gizlin pressed on, stating he would use this chance to teach him a lesson, and that his fists alone would be more than enough to do the job. Kane's face twisted with fury, but Gizlin coolly offered a bare-knuckle brawl, a fight that clearly played into Kane's strengths. Then he dropped a bombshell, betting 2,000 gold coins on his own victory. A hush fell over the crowd as the duel took a shocking turn. The hired thug was momentarily stunned. He smirked, secretly thrilled that Gizlin was digging his own grave. And with that, the floodgates opened as they started taking additional bets from the crowd. The room buzzed with new wagers, and many put their money on Kane. Yet a daring few now backed Gizlin. Kane, however, found the whole thing amusing. Accepting the terms, he cast off his cloak with a dramatic flair. But in a treacherous move, he kept his sword drawn and lunged at Gizlin. Belinda screamed a curse, shouting Gizlin's name in support. In that same instant, Kane's fist flew toward his opponent's face. Gizlin let out a small laugh at Kane's utter lack of honor. He sidestepped the blade with ease. As the attack unfolded, Kane shifted his weight to deliver a powerful kick. But Gizlin reacted in a flash, instantly adjusting his stance. In the same fluid motion, he slammed a fist into Kane's leg and immediately coiled for another strike. This time, his knuckles met his opponent's chin with a sickening crack. Kane staggered back, consumed by pain, before crashing to the ground. He couldn't process it. Where could a commoner have learned these moves? The crowd roared to life as more and more people began to believe in a Gizlin victory. Meanwhile, Gizlin stood over him, his voice cold. "Get up," he commanded. "This fight isn't over yet." Kane's patience finally snapped. He surged to his feet and charged forward with a furious roar. Kane attacked relentlessly with his sword, but Gizlin expertly evaded every single blow. In the heat of his rage, Kane couldn't understand why. Not long ago, this boy wouldn't have even dared to meet his gaze. But now, he was proving to be the stronger fighter. In a flash, Gizlin twisted Kane's arm, then drove a punishing knee into his side. Kane was already bleeding and battered, but he knew he had to kill Gizlin to protect his family's future. Yet, he was completely helpless, able only to endure the merciless blows. After what felt like an eternity, he was a trembling wreck. Gizlin approached, grabbing him by the hair and forcing his head up. Out of the blue, Gizlin's words cut deep. "I feel sorry for your father." Gizlin spoke of the past, of how their father's friendship led Kane's dad to save the Perdium family from utter ruin. "But you," Gizlin spat, "you don't share any of his ideals." The accusation hit Kane like a physical blow, leaving him frozen in shock. Suddenly, a memory flashed in his mind. Years ago, everyone had tried to stop his father from helping the Perdiums. And not even a week ago, his father had wanted to help them again. Kane couldn't understand it, and the thought made his blood boil. He remembered pleading with his father not to go asking why he was so determined when everyone else was against it. His father had turned to him and said with quiet conviction, "Because Gizlin's father is my friend." The memory echoed in the present, freezing Kane to his very soul. Right then, he saw Gizlin's fist rising for another strike. Kane squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the impact. But the blow never came. Seeing the look on Kane's face, Gizlin knew something had changed. For a long moment, Kane simply stared at the hand offered to him. Then his head fell in shame. He managed to whisper that he admitted defeat. Gizlin was genuinely surprised. The crowd exploded into a deafening cheer, celebrating the impossible victory. Gizlin's family was overcome with joy at his triumph. But a furious voice roared Kane's name as the thug charged toward him. He was livid. He had trusted Kane, and now he was just giving up. But Kane merely told the man to get lost, adding that he was leaving. The thug raged, calling Kane a coward. Just then, a calm voice spoke from behind him. It was Gizlin. A slow smile spread across Gizlin's face. "I believe it's time to collect what's mine." The thug looked back confused. Gizlin then boomed to the entire tavern that the thug had generously offered to pay for everyone's meat and drinks. The man's face flushed with fury. "I never agreed to that," he sputtered. "You take that back right now." But Gizlin just placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Consider this the price of defeat," he said smoothly. "It won't even count toward the bet." Gizlin leaned in, reminding him that he still owed 2,000 gold coins on top of everything. And immediately after, he gave the thug a subtle, chilling look that promised a grim fate if he dared to run. Staring into Gizlin's formidable eyes, the man was terrified. Once he agreed to pay, Gizlin simply turned and walked away. The next day, the money was delivered. He calculated that with this amount, he could finally hire a small group of mercenaries. But it would take too long to earn the rest of what he needed. The plan was a dead end. Suddenly, Belinda and Helena walked into the room. Gizlin glanced at them and asked what they won. Helena shot back a sarcastic question about how he planned to spend his winnings. When her brother asked if she needed something, Helena simply replied that she was just asking. But Belinda chimed in with a knowing smile, saying it was obvious. Lady Amelia's birthday is coming up, she teased. Gizlin probably wants to buy her an expensive gift. While the girls chattered away, Gizlin remained lost in his own world. A fiancé, the news hit him out of nowhere. He had to ask them directly to be sure. Belinda scoffed, convinced he was just putting on an act. But Helena clarified they meant Count Reifeld's daughter. Hearing that name, a jolt of recognition shot through him. The pieces of his memory finally clicked into place. Amelia, a woman loved by all for her pure heart and kind deeds. But he knew the dark future that awaited her. As the infamous Witch of the North who would lead a bloody rebellion, she was also the mastermind behind Delene's plot to annihilate the Gizlin family. The mere thought of that traitor sent a wave of cold fury through him. He asked when his father would return, learning he had about a week. A week? Gizlin smirked. That was more than enough time. He announced a visit to the Reifelds, leaving Belinda utterly bewildered. Since her birthday was still some time away, he offered a cryptic reason. I'm going to collect an old debt. Meanwhile, Amelia's picture-perfect life went on. After receiving a new pair of shoes, she gifted them to a simple village girl. The young girl was overwhelmed by the gesture, tears welling in her eyes. Amelia smiled gently. If anyone is to walk barefoot in my domain, it should be me, she declared, ordering her guards to give the people food and shelter. As her orders were carried out, a wave of noise erupted. Amelia stepped forward, greeted by a chorus of heartfelt thanks. Back at her estate as a servant tended to her feet, Bernard showered her with praise for her masterful performance. Amelia's gentle mask dropped. Father demands absolute obedience, she stated coldly. But I know the truth. People follow those who offer bread and a roof over their heads. Bernard agreed, promising that since she had captured the people's hearts, he would ensure the inheritance dispute swung in her favor. In response, she stared at him blankly, then sent a sharp kick straight into his face. Explain yourself, she demanded, her voice like ice. Tell me about the duel with the Northern Swordmaster. Bernard apologized profusely, explaining a victory would have brought the master to their side. He kissed her foot, swearing his eternal loyalty. But she just sneered. Is this the weakling I raised? Gripping his chin, she commanded him to discard his weakness. Changing the subject, he reported that the Merchant Guild had secured all checkpoint construction materials. They had also bought the loyalty of every soldier and knight who had abandoned the Perdium lands. A flicker of approval showed in Amelia's eyes. She praised him, ordering him to maintain the facade of a simple merchant guild. Suddenly, a servant burst in, interrupting their secret meeting. He brought an urgent message from the gate. Gizlin had arrived. What is that limping dog doing here? Amelia spat, her face twisting in disgust. The servant froze, terrified to answer. But then came the shocking news. Gizlin was here to discuss the Merchant Guild. Moments later, Amelia faced Gizlin in the parlor. As he greeted her, she remained silent, her cat hissing with hostility. It's incredibly rude to visit unannounced, she declared, her voice dripping with venom. The young man simply smiled. I decided to bring you a gift. He presented a single flower. I bought it from your guild's storefront. He then declared his intent to become a loyal customer. Amelia's eyes narrowed, her silence thick with suspicion. She shot to her feet. I don't understand what you're implying, she snapped. Your gift is accepted. Now leave, she ordered. But Gizlin just smirked. Sit down. The command in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Turning slowly, she stared at him. Was this really the same pathetic boy who would bleed at the mere sight of her? I need money, Gizlin stated plainly. 10,000 gold pieces. The outrageous sum made her scowl. Is this some scheme from your family? She sneered. No, he replied calmly. This is just about me. Besides, you have no intention of marrying me anyway. His words struck her like a physical blow. She froze, her arrogant facade cracking for the first time. In fact, Gizlin continued, a dangerous glint in his eye. I'd rather marry the knight behind that door. As he spoke, a hint of his true power flared, and Amelia's cat erupted in a furious hiss. The creature stood guard, its back arched, growling at the man who was no longer prey. Such things aren't funny even as a joke, she retorted. Gizlin promised to keep her secrets if she provided the loan. But Amelia flatly refused. Bernard, she called. The knight entered instantly, his presence filling the room as he greeted the young lord. Gizlin knew this man was Amelia's right hand, a monster whose strength already rivaled that of his own swordmasters. If I die here, Gizlin declared unfazed, a war will ignite between our lands. Amelia laughed, a cold, cruel sound. We'll simply say a bodyguard killed an intruder who trespassed in his fiancée's private quarters. Bernard disposed of him. The knight drew his sword without hesitation. Even faced with her murderous intent, Gizlin wasn't surprised. Instead, a predatory grin spread across his face. It was time to get serious. With a flash of steel, Gizlin drew his own sword. An arrogant smirk danced on Bernard's lips as he watched the young man. Gizlin's gaze was fixed on him too, until something else caught his eye. A flicker of movement from just behind Bernard. They'd come for his blind spot, but the assassin's blade only met empty air, slicing clean through the back of his chair. With his foe advancing, Gizlin launched into a flawless backflip. Timing it perfectly, his legs shot out, slamming into the man with incredible force. A deafening crash echoed as the window exploded inwards. The man and his chair were sent flying. Seeing this, Amelia and Bernard could only stare in utter shock. Rage burned within Gizlin. To send an assassin into his own room? He declared their hospitality utterly pathetic, his body coiling ready for war. Then the piercing scream of steel meeting steel filled the air. Gizlin quipped coldly, "It seems your household doesn't teach basic etiquette." Bernard shot back, "You were the first to show disrespect." He snarled that Gizlin deserved no warm welcome after his behavior. Bernard lunged forward, his blade a silver blur, but the boy sidestepped the blow with ease. Gizlin spun a kick, slicing through the air, narrowly missing its target. Without a second's pause, his other leg snapped out, finding its mark with a sickening thud. The powerful kick sent Bernard stumbling backward. He always knew Gizlin as a talentless nobody, but this proved he was a master of combat. Amelia's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Bernard, get serious." Her voice was pure ice. "Stop messing around and bring me his head." Her venomous glare made Bernard flinch. But then his entire demeanor shifted. The games were over. This was a fight to the death. Gizlin just let out a low chuckle, amused that a mere knight would act so bold. Bernard growled that this was a formal invitation to die. In an instant, both warriors readied themselves, their auras flaring for a decisive clash. Bernard exploded forward, closing the gap in a flash. But Gizlin's reflexes were inhuman. He swayed back just enough, dodging the fatal strike. Still, the tip of the blade left a shallow cut on his cheek. This night, he was dangerously fast. The real battle had finally begun. A whirlwind of strikes and dodges, a deadly dance of two masters. From the sidelines, Amelia watched in disbelief. How could Gizlin possibly match Bernard blow for blow? But then, her expression darkened. Meanwhile, the clash only grew more ferocious. A blade whistled towards Gizlin's face, but he parried it with a sharp clang of steel. He immediately pushed forward, unleashing a devastating counterthrust. Bernard barely managed to evade the blow. He saw an opening and moved to trap Gizlin's sword. As their blades locked, he lunged for a finishing blow. But Gizlin just sighed, asking, "Are you really trying that move again?" With those words, Gizlin vaulted into the air. But in that moment, the very atmosphere shifted. A colossal wave of mana erupted from Bernard. Bernard smirked. "That trick won't work on me a third time." He unleashed his power, shattering Gizlin's attack. The boy was sent crashing to the floor. The impact was immense, and a grimace of pain crossed Gizlin's face. Giving him no time to recover, Bernard brought his sword down for the final strike. But Gizlin twisted away, evading the blade by a hair's breadth, and then shot back several meters, creating distance. He never expected Bernard could use mana to cancel his technique. Bernard's voice cut through the tension. "The rumors about you, they were all lies." He kicked Gizlin's sword away, remarking, "Those aren't just refined techniques. That's the movement of a true warrior." "Your skills are impressive," he admitted, "but they're useless against me." Bernard was sure the fight was over. Gizlin knew they had crossed a point of no return. Bernard's blade pointed straight for his head. In a direct clash technique alone, couldn't bridge their gap in power. Because of this, Gizlin decided it was time to end this little game. But Gizlin simply replied, "I'm short on time as well." With a smirk, he readied his final move. To his horror, Bernard saw it, mana forming into invisible threads. He realized too late what was happening. In that split second, Gizlin's sword was already at his neck. In a blinding flash of movement, Gizlin was upon him. He drove his knee into Bernard's face with brutal force. Bernard stumbled back, his mind reeling. How was this even possible? At that moment, a sliver of fear pierced Amelia's heart. In the next moment, Gizlin's sword was unsheathed, poised for the final deadly strike. He brought it down with all his power, but Bernard, battered but not broken, held firm. He parried the blow and immediately spun away. He managed to create a precious second of breathing room. Gizlin, however, landed perfectly, his balance unshaken. Bernard screamed at the girl, "Get out of here now!" He could no longer guarantee her safety. It was time to unleash everything he had. Gizlin simply smiled. Now this is a proper fight. A thrill shot through him. It had been far too long since he'd faced a worthy foe. At Bernard's warning, Amelia finally fled. Pure, unadulterated rage consumed her. How dare Gizlin humiliate her like this? Her mind raced. Someone must have leaked information about the trade guild. The rumors painted him as a nobody, so she just assumed he was lucky. But now, she saw how terribly she had misjudged him. She cursed aloud, wondering where her guards were. But as she rounded the corner, her blood ran cold. All of her men lay defeated on the ground. A lone girl stood among the bodies, turning slowly as she heard Amelia's voice. Seeing Amelia, the girl Belinda offered a chilling greeting. "Who are you?" Amelia demanded. Belinda's only reply was, "Be quiet." And in the blink of an eye, she was behind her. The cold steel of a knife against her throat left Amelia frozen in pure terror. After ripping the spider off, Belinda was shocked Amelia still wore the grotesque thing. The girl just smiled, claiming it was all for the sake of their engagement. Belinda knew Amelia's family despised her because of the insects that swarmed her, so she weaponized them, a twisted act of revenge on the world. Was it trauma or just a desperate cry for validation? Tossing the disgusting creature aside, she declared it didn't suit Amelia. Then, with a sickening crunch, she crushed it and demanded they work together. Meanwhile, an overwhelming wave of mana erupted from Bernard, threatening to consume the entire room. Gizlin felt the very air turn heavy, crushing him. This level of power was suffocating. Bernard scoffed again, mocking the idea of Gizlin being a worthy foe. Then he sneered. How could a lowlife like Gizlin dare compare himself to the noble Amelia? Gizlin shot back that he was indeed an aristocrat and couldn't believe such insults were coming from a mere bodyguard. For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then, steel screamed against steel. Once more, Bernard pressed his assault, roaring, "Do not dishonor the name of the nobility." The attacks were a blur of silver, but Gizlin somehow managed to parry every strike. Still, each blow was a near-fatal threat. In the heat of their clash, he realized Bernard was fighting with pure, unadulterated rage. He hammered Gizlin with a relentless storm of attacks, but his opponent finally had enough. With a fierce roar, he deflected Bernard's blade. Then he unleashed a devastating counter, a blow meant to end it all. But Bernard reacted, instantly twisting into a counter of his own. In a flash of steel, he sent his opponent's sword flying. Gizlin was stunned by the sheer force of that final impact. Bernard's voice was cold as ice. "That was your last move." In that same instant, his blade was at Gizlin's throat. But a flicker of confusion crossed his face. Gizlin had been prepared to be wounded. He had deliberately used his own shoulder to divert the fatal strike. Seizing that moment of hesitation, Gizlin lunged. Bernard cursed, irritated by the man's tenacity. There was never a second to breathe. He deflected the blade again, then drove a powerful kick into Gizlin's ribs. "There's a world of difference," Bernard growled, "between a true warrior and a child just showing off with a sword." Gizlin slammed hard against the wall, the impact rattling his bones, but he refused to go down. He quickly analyzed the fight. Bernard's blinding speed and seamless combos gave him complete control of the battle's rhythm. In a head-on clash, their swords felt magnetically locked. Gizlin knew that with his current reserves of mana, defeating Bernard was impossible. But that was only based on the mana he had at that moment. Bernard was missing one critical piece of the puzzle. He had no idea Gizlin possessed a unique secret art of mana cultivation. The moment he activated it, Gizlin's speed skyrocketed. In the blink of an eye, he was right in Bernard's personal space. Their blades met in a furious symphony of sparks. But seconds later, it was Bernard's sword that went flying from his grasp. Bernard was utterly dumbfounded. How could this man suddenly summon so much power in the middle of a fight? As the cold steel of Gizlin's sword touched his skin, the fight stopped. Just then, Belinda and Amelia entered the room. "Take the money and get out," Amelia ordered. Gizlin fired back. "Why couldn't you have just paid me when I asked politely?" With a sharp flick, he pulled his sword away from Bernard's neck. Belinda scoffed, remarking that this was hardly a lover's spat. Gizlin just shrugged, saying they had a simple disagreement. Then he dropped a bombshell on Amelia. His price for silence had just gone up, to a staggering 20,000 gold pieces. As Gizlin casually strolled out, chaos erupted in the palace. In a blind rage, Amelia began destroying everything she could get her hands on. Bernard apologized, blaming himself for the failure, but the enraged noblewoman completely ignored him. "He's changed," she muttered, her voice trembling. "He's changed too much." When Bernard asked if he should report this to Duchess Deline, Amelia spun around and slapped him hard. "Watch your tongue," she shrieked. "That woman is a monster." She then confessed she was working with Deline in secret because the Duchess promised to help her eliminate the Perdiums. But what truly terrified her was the commercial guild's secret being exposed. The conclusion was simple. Gizlin had to die. After hearing her frantic explanation, Bernard bowed his head and accepted the order. He reported that Gizlin had a deep shoulder wound and other minor cuts. Having exhausted his mana, he would need time to recover. But something still troubled Bernard. "We cannot use our own knights for this," he warned. Amelia's eyes gleamed with a cruel light. "I agree," she said. "We'll need dogs bred specifically for this kind of hunt." A chill went down Bernard's spine, picturing the horror she was planning. Her orders were clear: gather the war orphans, those with no family, no status. She demanded they find 12 individuals, all masters of mana control. Meanwhile, Bernard was already devising a plan, scouting the perfect location for an ambush. After weighing his options, he promised Amelia that he would prepare everything. Amelia, meanwhile, could barely contain her glee, hungry for the sight of Gizlin paying for his audacity. Unaware, Gizlin tended to his wounds as he walked, his mind consumed by the image of the treacherous Amelia. While others fretted over Gizlin, he simply waved off their concerns, assuring everyone he was perfectly fine. For such a reckless gamble, the wound was surprisingly shallow, and the payoff was immense. Because now, Gizlin was sitting on a mountain of gold. A part of him wanted to crush Amelia's throat, but that would ignite an all-out war. With barbarians already at their gates, Gizlin knew he had to handle this with as little bloodshed as possible. This time, he would turn Amelia into a pawn in his own game. Belinda watched him, her silence breaking, as she asked if the plan had succeeded. She recalled her orders secure the area and seize Amelia as a hostage the moment fighting broke out. Gizlin confirmed it, turning to ask Fergus a question. But as he spoke, a searing pain shot through him. The agony forced Gizlin to his knees, his sudden collapse shocking everyone. He now understood. Activating the third core came with a heavy price one that would cause devastating problems down the line. Just as he was pondering a safer way to grow his mana, Belinda suddenly seized his hand. She checked his pulse, her expression grim. His mana flow was in absolute chaos. Then a soft light began glowing from her palms. As he watched the process, Gizlin started to piece together what was happening. But his thoughts were shattered by another wave of pain and nausea. Yet instead of blood, a strange corrupted air escaped his lips. In an instant, Gizlin realized the blockage in his mana channels had vanished. A cure like this was only possible through masterful mana compression. His mother had brought Belinda here. He'd always known she was no ordinary maid, but he never could have guessed the truth of her identity. Gizlin knew he needed powerful allies more than ever. As if reading his mind, Belinda vowed her loyalty, ready to help him at a moment's notice. Then she asked the crucial question, why did he need so much money? After a tense pause, Gizlin revealed only Amelia could secure the funds. Belinda and Fergus stared back, completely stunned by his reasoning. She warned him of the danger if his scheme was exposed, but he promised them Amelia would never speak a word. He then looked her in the eyes, asking for her trust. The maid nodded, then asked what he planned to do with the fortune. But when Gizlin uttered the words, monster forest, Belinda's face went pale with terror. He gravely explained they needed the resources to conquer it. Fergus declared it was impossible. For generations they had thrown everything at that forest. But they had always failed. Gizlin cut him off, changing the subject. He asked about the special request he'd made before he left. The old man, looking slightly baffled, replied that the very person he sought was waiting for them nearby. Gizlin announced he was heading there immediately, but Belinda protested, urging him to return home and rest. He reminded her that a woman like Amelia would never let this insult go. Belinda argued they could handle it, but Gizlin insisted the situation had changed. He needed to find a truly capable commander, and for that they had to journey into the desolate wilderness. The area was utterly deserted. No one answered their knock yet. They knew they were in the right place. Without warning, the door creaked open, revealing a man shrouded in shadow. His voice, rough from disuse, demanded who they were. The sight of him left everyone but Gizlin speechless. Belinda whispered that this wreck of a man couldn't possibly be a legendary commander, but Gizlin's voice was firm. This was him, the man they had been searching for. The man snarled at them and to leave, slamming the door. But as it closed, Gizlin called out his name, Jillian. The captain of mercenaries froze in his tracks. He turned back slowly, his eyes locking onto the young man, who now extended a hand in greeting. "It's been too long, Gillian," Gizlin said. The name of the legendary mercenary squad hung in the air, shocking everyone. The Ratatoska Mercenaries, a name whispered in awe even long after they had disbanded. And their leader was none other than Jillian himself, the man Gizlin had just invited to join his cause. In that same instant, a battle axe sliced through the air. It flew inches from Gizlin's face, tearing his tunic. The sudden violent attack left everyone paralyzed. Jillian's voice was a low growl. "How do you know my name, and why have you come here?" Belinda urged Gizlin to fall back, fearing the man was unstable. But Gizlin stood his ground. "I know how to save your daughter," he said calmly, "so let's talk." The victims were consumed by fever, coughing up blood. All who caught the disease writhed in agony until their final breath. For this reason, it was known by a terrifying name, the Endless Punishment. A girl's agonizing scream echoed from inside the house. As Jillian rushed to her side, he held his daughter close. Gizlin knew he wasn't too late. In his past life, he'd failed to recruit Jillian because the man had taken his own life after his daughter succumbed to the disease. The room told a story of desperation. It was clear Jillian had poured every last coin into his daughter's treatment. A heart-wrenching scream tore through the air. "Just let me die!" Unable to watch the child suffer, Gizlin knew he had to act now. But just as he moved forward, a hand shot out, stopping him cold. "Leave," Belinda ordered. "If even the priests failed, what can you possibly do?" But Gizlin pushed past her, his voice absolute. "I am the only one who can save her." He stared into Belinda's eyes. "Do you believe me?" The intensity of his question left her completely speechless. He then thrust a note into her hands, commanding her to buy every item on the list. The girl's eyes widened as she scanned the contents. In this era, this disease was a death sentence, but a cure would be found in the future. And since the topic was once famous, Gizlin remembered the entire recipe in perfect detail. The only issue was the sky-high price of the ingredients, but they had the money. Gizlin began his work, and when he was done, he handed the finished medicine to the father. "Rachel needs to drink this," Gizlin stated simply. Without a single moment of hesitation, Jillian gave the antidote to his daughter. For a tense second, nothing happened. But then the cursed marks on her skin began to vanish. The spots faded away one by one, and a peaceful calm washed over the girl's face. Everyone who witnessed it was completely shell-shocked. They watched in awe as the marks truly disappeared. Jillian could hardly believe this miracle was real.
Everything seems to be working, Gizlin noted. Jillian stammered. How is this possible? Even the strongest healers were helpless.
Gizlin calmly replied, "The power of saints is not absolute. It depends on the patient's own will to live." The father's hands began to tremble. "Can my daughter truly be cured now?" he asked, his voice cracking. "She will be fully healed in 2 months," Gizlin promised. Hearing this, a brilliant light of hope ignited in Jillian's eyes. Overwhelmed by the miracle, he collapsed to the floor. He pleaded with Gizlin, knowing this kindness didn't come for free. "All I have to offer is my body," Jillian declared. "I will be your slave, your tool, anything you desire." But Gizlin replied, "I don't need a slave. I need a true leader for the mercenaries." In that instant, Jillian gazed into the young man's eyes, trying to understand the profound ambition hidden within them. Silently, he raised an axe and in a single motion cut off one of his braids. When everyone looked at Jillian again, they were stunned. They could barely believe what they were seeing. It was as if a completely different person now stood before them. Turning, Jillian's voice was sharp as he asked, "Are there enemies nearby? Did anyone follow you?" Gizlin simply replied, "Everyone who came with me is already inside this room." "Do you have people who envy you?" Jillian pressed. The young man shot back, "And soon there will be even more of them." In a flash, Jillian snatched a spear and hurled it through the wall. It ripped a gaping hole before embedding itself in a tree outside. He then yanked a rope tied to the spear, dragging a hidden spy violently into the room. As his hand clamped around the man's neck, the spy let out a choked gasp. "Who sent you?" Jillian snarled. The man just sputtered that it was impossible. Jillian asked what to do with their captive, but Gizlin told him to be silent. The boy had already deduced who was behind the attack. "I didn't want to get my hands dirty today," Gizlin sighed. But Jillian stopped him. "Allow me," he declared. With a sickening snap, he ended the spy's life. His duty done, he bowed deeply before Gizlin. Belinda watched with a chill, noting the absolute lack of hesitation in his movements. She couldn't fathom why Gizlin would need such a ferocious warrior. Meanwhile, Jillian swore an oath his life now belonged to his new master. "I'll be counting on you, Commander," Gizlin replied. Soon after, his rivals learned their entire recon squad had been wiped out, sending them into a panic. Realizing they were making a scene, the soldiers quieted down and apologized to their captain. The captain scoffed, saying Gizlin couldn't have found the spies on his own. Then he received the report the boy had hired Jillian. The news sent the captain into a fury as he grabbed one of his own men. "Is this true?" he roared. Trembling in fear, the soldier confirmed it. A wicked grin spread across the captain's face. Jillian had finally shown himself. Meanwhile, their group was making its way through the forest. Belinda couldn't help but complain about the cramped cart. "Jillian isn't some weapons merchant," she grumbled. "A sword or an axe is all he really needs." Gizlin told her to drop it, reminding her the cart was for Rachel. He asked for her patience, promising it would all be useful soon. She then asked if the spy was sent by Amelia. When he confirmed it, she knew they were in trouble. After all, the assassin wore the distinct mask of the Wildcat Guild, an infamous and illegal organization. They were a shadowy group of smugglers, murderers, and traffickers. Belinda warned that they were a powerful dark guild filled with ruthless ex-mercenaries. It was for this reason she warned Gizlin to be more careful. But he just brushed her off, insisting there was nothing to worry about. After all, Gizlin's fate now rested entirely on Jillian. As they journeyed onward, their path was suddenly blocked. Jillian's instincts screamed danger in an instant. An enemy was close. However, their true target wasn't the cargo. It was Jillian himself. But the man was faster, his hands reaching for the weapons on his back. With a sword and axe drawn, he masterfully parried both blows. Then he launched a vicious counterattack on the assassins. He cleaved one clean in two. As their bodies crashed to the ground, the cart continued rolling onward. More enemies emerged from the trees, cutting the ropes of their trap. In a heartbeat, a massive tree began to topple, aimed directly at the cart. Belinda screamed in terror, certain they were about to be crushed. But with a powerful tug on the reins, Jillian wrenched the cart out of the way. The cart skidded to a halt just as the colossal tree smashed into the ground beside it. Gizlin remained unfazed by the ambush. But now, dozens of hostile figures had them surrounded. One of them stepped forward, his eyes locked on Jillian. Locked on. Hearing his name, Jillian met the squad leader's glare. The assassin spat the word coward, accusing him of abandoning their gang for his daughter. Stepping down from his cart, Jillian's face was a mask of indifference. He simply stated that he didn't understand. The assassin's voice dripped with rage. He screamed that Jillian had single-handedly destroyed his life, and now he pretended not to recognize his old friends. Jillian remained utterly silent. The commander sneered, assuming his old captain was just playing dumb. With a roar, he ordered his men to attack Gizlin and offered to help, but Jillian refused his aid. As the horde swarmed him, a colossal wave of mana erupted from Jillian's body. In a single blinding flash, he obliterated every enemy in his path. Still more assassins surged forward, blocking his weapon. Jillian's axe became a blur of motion, tearing open his opponent's defenses. He severed the next man's hand before burying his axe in his neck. He effortlessly blocked another attack, then swung his axe and took his foe's arm clean off. It took out his foe's arm. A chilling realization washed over the captain. Gillian's legendary strength hadn't faded in the slightest. He barked a new order, split the unit attack from both sides. In response, Gillian simply mounted his horse. As everyone watched in confusion, Gillian grabbed a massive weapon strapped to the saddle, and then, brandishing the colossal battle axe, he charged forward. For maximum destructive force, he gripped the weapon with both hands, unleashing a devastating swing that wiped out several men at once. One of the thieves shouted for someone to spook the horse, but Gillian gave them no such chance, continuing his relentless slaughter. Watching this display of brutal power, Belinda was frozen in horror. At that moment, an assassin lunged from above, aiming for a killing blow. But Gillian's reflexes were inhuman. He instantly raised a shield, completely blocking the strike. The captain screamed that Gillian had no right to live after destroying his life. He then swore on his very soul that he would kill him. Leaping back, he changed targets and attacked the horse. Mortally wounded, the noble creature collapsed to the ground. As Gillian landed on his feet, they immediately swarmed him, but he met their charge, blocking the blow with his axe. He followed with a brutal shield bash into the man's side. The assassin staggered back, shocked to hear Gillian was no longer the leader of Ratatosk. He furiously demanded to know who was in charge, if not Gillian. Gillian replied that he'd left that past behind him. Now he was nothing more than Gizlin's escort. This answer only ignited the assassin's rage into an inferno. He lunged forward, vowing once more to take Gillian's life. And so their final battle truly began. Gillian's shield effortlessly deflected every blow. The assassin spat that when Gillian left their squad had fallen into ruin. Because of him, the assassin had lost his entire purpose for living. Gillian said nothing. He just continued the silent clash of steel. But the mercenary was incredibly strong as well, deftly dodging every one of Gillian's deadly attacks. With a swift, powerful kick, he struck the shield dead center. The shield couldn't withstand the immense pressure, and a massive crack ripped through it. He roared that he had dedicated his life to their unit, poured everything into it only for Gillian to throw it all away to become some rich kid's lapdog. For that betrayal, the assassin could never forgive his former comrade. He glared with pure hatred as Gillian's shield finally shattered. With his defense gone, Gillian finally went on the offensive with his own weapon. As he weaved through the blades, the assassin suddenly appeared right in front of him. But Gillian reacted instantly, pulling back and narrowly evading the strike. Gillian launched a counterattack, but the assassin deftly dodged again. All the while, the man's eyes burned with a mad, obsessive fire. He sneered that Gillian used to be strong, but while he was busy caring for his daughter, the mercenary had been relentlessly honing his skills. At this point, Gillian was completely out of his league. The assassin kicked the grounded blades, sending them soaring back towards Gillian, who deflected them with a single hand. In that instant, the assassin closed the distance. Sensing the attack, Gillian countered, but his foe vaulted effortlessly into the air to dodge. The mercenary lunged, aiming for a finishing blow, but Gillian caught the deadly knife with his bare hand. Finally, he had to ask, was revenge truly the only thing driving him? In that moment, the mercenary realized Gillian hadn't been serious this entire time. As the thought crossed his mind, a crushing weight slammed into his face. The impact sent him hurtling backward. His flight ended abruptly as he crashed hard against a tree. Suddenly, Gillian broke the silence, saying he didn't understand. After all, the mercenary had countless chances for revenge. Why now? Gillian demanded. The man just laughed as if the answer was obvious. The man sneered that he did come looking, but he found no leader. All he saw was an old man he was sick of. Someone not worth dirtying his hands on. He demanded to know where the legendary Gillian, the man he once idolized, had vanished to. Gillian tossed his blade aside. He served another, now he declared, but he would pay homage to his old comrade, just as he did for Commander Ratatoske. Gripping his sword, the mercenary roared for the real fight to finally begin. Gillian easily parried the strike, but the man screamed that this was the battle he had been waiting for. They clashed in a blur of lightning-fast strikes. Gillian surged forward, unleashing a flurry of attacks, but every single blow was masterfully dodged. The mercenary's own assault met the same fate, but then an opening appeared and Gillian landed a devastating strike. The man's face twisted in agony, but his will to fight burned on. At one point, Gillian raised his axe, declaring he remembered the captain of the 5th Squadron Ratatoske, and then spoke the mercenary's true name, Viego. Hearing it, the man smiled, and with that, Gillian ended it. For a long moment, he stood over the body of his fallen comrade. Suddenly, a voice praised his efforts. It was Belinda and Gizlin. The girl chattered excitedly about how much money their spoils would bring. Gillian apologized for the drawn-out battle, but to Gizlin, it was nothing. In fact, Gillian had shattered all his expectations. The legends of Gillian always began by describing his rise to become the king of mercenaries. Abruptly, Gizlin asked Gillian if he remembered the man. Gillian confirmed it was an old comrade from his past. The word comrade made Gizlin pause. It made him wonder what his own companions were doing now. Before they met, they all had their own separate lives. One day, Gizlin vowed he would gather them all again. 2 days later, they finally arrived in the lands of Perdium. Gillian asked if this was the very same territory. Gizlin's confirmation was short and to the point. The young man reflected that it was good to have a place to return to, something he never had in his previous life. Gillian watched Gizlin but said nothing. Gizlin then asked what he thought of his lands. Gillian admitted they weren't bad, but Gizlin grimly agreed they were terrible.
Gillian had heard rumors that these lands were locked in constant war with barbarians.
But the reality was far worse than he ever imagined. Gizlin was determined to fix it, and he asked Gillian for his help. The road ahead would be long and bloody, but the young man was resolute. Suddenly, Belinda spotted something in the distance and screamed. Gazing toward the horizon, Gizlin's eyes also widened with a hint of surprise. There before him stood the man who was his father. The councils were debating how to use their forces, with some arguing the Rayfolds were useless, even reporting them for attacking their own soldiers. Gizlin listened to the familiar arguments in silence. A small smile touched his lips as he thought, nothing had changed at all. Though he appeared to be a young lord, he possessed the wisdom of decades. The young man announced that they had all worked hard, then turned to face his father. The older man's gaze was as stern and unyielding as stone. Gizlin remembered how, as a child, that severe expression used to terrify him. But now he understood. It wasn't anger. It was the crushing weight of responsibility his father carried every single day. His father demanded to know where Gizlin had been for an entire week. He calmly replied that he'd gone to visit the Rayfolds. Did he cause any trouble, his father pressed? The boy simply said no. But then another man interjected, announcing that Gizlin had won a fortune in a duel with Cain. The man then snidely asked if the young lord had managed to blow it all already. Gizlin replied coolly that he was simply settling a matter concerning Amelia. Another lord stepped in, reminding him of his solemn duties as the heir.
Finally, the Count silenced them all, but Gizlin could tell from his expression that the problems were far from over.
He asked if it was true, that Gizlin had killed Jamal and Felipe, who were trying to sell Helena. The memories of that night flashed through Gizlin's mind. Another man chimed in, speculating that Gizlin was too weak to handle them directly, so he must have cleverly pitted them against each other. The knights were traitors, to be sure, but Gizlin knew their deaths brought no one any joy. Gizlin confirmed this was the gist of it, and the man seemed pleased with his own insight. Just then, a voice of praise cut through the air. His father declared that Helena's safety was the only thing that truly mattered. Gizlin was stunned. It was the first time his father had ever complimented him. Seizing the moment, he decided to ask for a favor. His father immediately shot him down, saying if this was about money, the answer was no. Another man chimed in, reminding them of Gizlin's long list of transgressions. In a fit of anger, he listed them one by one, and Gizlin couldn't deny a single word. It was all true. Gizlin calmly replied he was only asking permission out of courtesy. He would proceed with his plan regardless. However, he refused to let Belinda in on it just yet. A single leak, after all, could spell disaster. He knew of a secret location within the monster forest, a place overflowing with runic stones. This precious mineral pulsed with raw magic, making it priceless. It was the core component in crafting magical tools and essential wherever magic was used. For generations, the Deline family had held a monopoly over all its known deposits. But with this knowledge, he intended to shatter that history. Belinda, on the other hand, despised being kept in the dark. Despite her feelings, she pledged to follow Gizlin's orders without question. When he spoke of hiring an army, Gillian questioned his judgment, warning it would attract dangerous attention. But Gizlin already had the perfect candidates in mind, and he planned to select them himself. Gillian instantly understood who Gizlin was talking about. These mercenaries were monsters of the battlefield. But if you failed to satisfy them, they would tear you apart. Even so, Gizlin's mind was made up. He would hire the legendary Cerberus mercenary squad. The very next day, they journeyed to tame these so-called wild dogs. Their camp was hidden on the very edge of the territory. As Gillian and Gizlin approached, they were instantly spotted. The lookouts snickered, seeing two travelers who looked hopelessly lost.
One of them scoffed, dismissing them as just another pair of pampered nobles.
But as he looked through his spyglass again, he saw a blur of motion. A blood-curdling scream suddenly echoed through the camp, and every mercenary froze. In a flash, Gillian had closed the distance, his hand clamped around a scout's head. He squeezed with overwhelming force, threatening to crush the man's skull. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he sent the man flying. Witnessing Gillian's terrifying power, the mercenaries' amusement vanished. Realizing this old man was no ordinary butler, they drew their weapons and surrounded him. Someone shouted that not even a high-ranking noble would dare to approach them so recklessly. The man threatened they wouldn't leave this place alive. But the smirk on his face instantly disappeared.
Because Gizlin himself had stepped forward. He coolly asked who was in charge there. Then a man strode toward the young noble, addressing the entire squad.
The sheer audacity of this aristocrat left them speechless. Finally, a mercenary captain broke the silence with a dark grin. He sneered, figuring they were just dealing with another arrogant noble who had a death wish. He swung his massive chained weapon and launched it at Gizlin with all his strength. As the deadly projectile closed in, Gizlin didn't even bat an eye. But in the last second, the weapon was violently knocked off course. Gillian had moved like lightning. The mercenary stared in shock, his chain pierced clean through by a simple sword. Gizlin had a feeling they wouldn't be greeted warmly. He gave Gillian a simple command: do what you want, but don't kill them.
Following his master's order, Gillian yanked the chain hard. The weapon's owner was dragged helplessly forward.
With a surge of power, Gillian launched the man into the air, only for the chain to wrap tightly around his neck. He then blasted the mercenary with a wave of mana. As the man choked, his comrades charged in. But Gillian simply grabbed the man's body and used him as a human projectile. He hurled the body into the charging mercenaries, sending them all crashing to the ground. His work done, Gillian turned his cold gaze upon the remaining men. Under that immense pressure, they all froze in absolute terror. Dismounting his horse, Gizlin's voice cut through the silence, asking how much longer he had to wait. He demanded they bring out their boss. A new voice suddenly spoke up, complaining that he'd been enjoying a nice nap. A man named Kower introduced himself, asking what Gizlin could possibly want. Gizlin stated he was here to hire them. Kower erupted in fury, pointing out that Gizlin had just assaulted his men.
Kower said calmly that nobles should learn some manners, but Gizlin shot back that it was just a simple greeting.
And the most effective way to demand respect. The boys simply laughed, asking if a full-scale massacre was Gizlin's idea of a formal introduction.
After a moment, Kower agreed to at least hear the young noble's proposal.
Gizlin then revealed his target, the monster forest. That was why he needed them. Kower's expression hardened, demanding to know who this kid was to just waltz into his territory. So Gizlin properly introduced himself. The second they heard his name, a dead silence fell over the entire camp. And then it erupted into roaring laughter as they declared that with a reputation like his, this insane behavior finally made sense. Kower then stated bluntly that there was no place for someone like Gizlin here, and he didn't want to hear another word. With that, he decided the negotiations were over. Gizlin went quiet for a beat. Then a voice from the crowd taunted Kower, asking if he was getting scared. A small smirk appeared on Gizlin's face. So the rumors about his squad's strength were just overblown hype after all.
Cornered Kower quickly changed his strategy, trying to make it about the price.
They were mercenaries, wasn't this just business? But Gizlin only scoffed, saying the weak always make excuses. Kower spat that this was all just a test. But Gizlin's taunts had already poisoned the air. He demanded Gizlin pay for the damages and get lost. But Gizlin wasn't about to back down. He called out to Kower, revealing the ultimate challenge, Morana's confession. The mercenary leader scoffed. Did this noble brat even grasp the weight of those words? Gizlin's smirk was his only answer. He knew exactly what it meant. This was no ordinary fight. It was a sacred duel from the mercenary world. A battle without mana, where each fighter's dominant hand was bound. They would fight within a sacred circle, and stepping outside meant forfeiting your life. More often than not, both combatants ended up dead. But Gizlin knew the rule: the loser must obey the victor. And with that, he threw down the gauntlet. Gillian's eyes widened in shock. To think Gizlin would invoke a mercenary custom. Refusing such a duel was a stain on one's honor, leaving Kower no choice but to accept. As everyone waited for his reply, the air in the room grew heavy, crackling with tension. Finally, Kower roared that if the master wanted a mercenary's honor, he'd get it. In moments, the stage for their deadly dance was set. With their hands bound tight, the two warriors stepped into the ring. Gillian watched with bated breath as the mercenaries erupted, chanting their leader's name. Kower sneered at Gizlin. A few parlor tricks wouldn't be enough to save him here. There was no escape now. Suddenly, Gizlin was violently yanked forward, completely caught off guard.
Kower pulled the boy into his grasp, boasting that he'd won this way 5 times before. But Gizlin wrenched himself free, declaring that 5 victories meant nothing.
He then mirrored the move, pulling Kower in just as hard. The mercenary scoffed, claiming he'd won like that hundreds of times. The moment the signal was given, their facades dropped. In a flash, they exploded into motion. Cold steel aimed for the throat. In the same breath, they twisted away, dodging the lethal strikes. A flicker of confusion crossed Kower's face. He never expected such flawless movements from a pampered noble. Their attacks were perfect mirror images. Every direct assault was met with a perfect block. Kower tried to break his balance, yanking on his arm, but Gizlin stood firm against his provocations. When Kower lunged for his back, Gizlin dodged with barely a hair's breadth to spare. Gizlin immediately countered, aiming for the mercenary chief, but Kower evaded the blow. In response, Kower launched a vicious kick. Gizlin's leg shot up, intercepting the attack with his own. But in the very next instant, a searing pain shot through his shin. Kower had to admit the kid was skilled. But his boast of hundreds of wins was laughable. Even one victory in this duel was a miracle. After landing the hit, he mocked Gizlin, telling him that if he was going to bluff, he should at least make it believable. The crowd roared in agreement, demanding he finish the aristocrat. But a single murderous glare from Gillian was enough to silence the entire room. With the crowd quelled, Gillian analyzed the fight. Things were looking grim for Gizlin. The circle was suffocatingly small and with mana forbidden. The duel became a brutal contest of raw weight and physical prowess. The bound hands only made it worse, and Gizlin was barely managing to parry. Kower was effortlessly controlling the flow of the battle. But if things truly turned deadly, Gillian was poised to intervene in a heartbeat. Seizing Gizlin's arm, Kower drove his blade towards his side. But as the knife plunged forward, Gizlin vaulted clean over his head, landing with perfect balance. But the moment his feet touched the ground, the pain in his leg erupted once more. Now he understood. Without mana to absorb the shock, every blocked attack sent waves of pain stacking up in his body. Kowar could see the agony on Gizlin's face. The boy's resistance was pathetic, yet he was the most stubborn noble he'd ever faced. And Kowar knew exactly what was going through his mind. This was a manaless confession. The longer Gizlin defended, the more damage he would accumulate. A cramp was already seizing his leg, the strain visible to all. But Kowar was enjoying this. He wanted the kid to struggle. It made the victory taste so much sweeter. He flipped the blade in his hand, changing his grip. He followed with a swift punch, which Gizlin managed to block.
When Kowar aimed for his head, Gizlin swayed back. But Kowar's hand was like a viper, instantly changing direction to follow its prey.
With a sharp smack, Gizlin slapped the attack away with his own hand. Seizing the opening, Kowar trapped Gizlin's hand and launched another kick. Gizlin reacted instinctively, blocking it with his leg just as before. A crippling agony shot through his limb. Kowar grinned. It was time to end this little game.
He pressed the blade against Gizlin's throat, ready for the final blow. As planned, Jillian reached for his axe, prepared to shatter the rules.
But in that critical moment, a chilling smile spread across Gizlin's face. He twisted away, evading Kowar's fatal strike with impossible speed. In one fluid motion, he shifted his stance and unleashed a counter of his own. In that instant, the duel's first blood was finally drawn. Seeing the gash on his own body, Kowar froze. The entire crowd stared in stunned silence. He landed a desperate blow and lunged again, but Gizlin was already gone. He lunged again, but his attack met nothing but air, as the boy dodged once more. In a flash, Gizlin countered his blade, slicing across Kowar's chest. A second cut followed, sending a wave of confusion through the crowd. The entire atmosphere shifted. Everyone had assumed Kowar was in complete control. Enraged, Kowar attacked again and missed again. Seizing the opening, Gizlin slammed his shoulder into him. A flurry of punches rained down on his face and neck. Gizlin raised his hand, then brought it down in a blur, driving his knife straight through Kowar's palm. Blinded by rage, Kowar attacked with renewed fury. He couldn't understand how the tables had turned. Just moments ago, Gizlin could barely even stand. But Jillian, watching from the sidelines with an analytical gaze, saw everything perfectly. Kowar's explosive movements were straining his own muscles. His desperate attempts to seize control were actually slowing him down. Gizlin, by contrast, moved with cold precision. Jillian was in awe. He had never dreamed that such a massive difference in weight could be overcome by pure technique. Suddenly, Kowar's men started yelling that they were getting bored. Gizlin remarked that he had to admit Kowar's resilience was impressive. Most fighters would have been out of mana and on the ground by now. But Kowar spat back that anyone who breaks a ritual's rules has no place in the mercenary world. With a smile, Gizlin admitted he was impressed. Then, in a shocking move, Kowar admitted that in terms of pure skill, he was inferior. However, he declared that skill wasn't the only path to victory. With a sudden spin, he grabbed Gizlin and pulled him close. The rule was simple. Anyone who stepped outside the circle's boundary would be declared the loser. No matter how skilled Gizlin was, a hard throw would send him out of the ring. With this thought, Kowar was sure that victory was his. But Gizlin moved like a phantom, reversing their positions and twisting Kowar's arm. For a split second, he was dangerously close to the edge. Before he could be thrown, he planted both feet squarely in Kowar's chest and kicked off. With his hand still trapped, he used the momentum to swing back into the circle's center, sending Kowar stumbling backward. That was the only opening Gizlin needed to slam the mercenary leader into the dirt. It was then that everyone saw Kowar's foot had landed outside the circle. Kowar was burning with the humiliation of his defeat. Gizlin stood over him and declared the victory was his. "Who are you?" Kowar roared. "Where did a brat like you learn skills like that?" But Gizlin's voice cut through him like ice. He sneered, saying that was no way to speak to his new master. Then he hauled Kowar back to his feet. Stunned, Kowar protested that the duel was over, but Gizlin's cold eyes told a different story. "Not quite," he retorted. "I haven't left the circle yet, and it's time to train my new subordinate." A fist crashed into Kowar's face. He hit the ground hard. The spectators could only watch, paralyzed by this unbelievable turn of events. Kowar tried to stop him, sputtering about the rules, but his words were cut off by another brutal strike from Gizlin. Gizlin leaned in mockingly and asked if Kowar was going to explain the rules of a real battlefield too. When Kowar tried to argue, Gizlin's command silenced him. A subordinate does not question their master's words. Kowar wanted to scream that the boy was insane, but another blow stole the thought from his mind. The one-sided beatdown continued. The other mercenaries were frozen, unsure if they should intervene. Finally, a scream tore from Kowar's throat, begging Gizlin to stop. As if finally hearing him, Gizlin yanked Kowar up by his collar, lifting him off the ground. But his voice was chillingly calm. "You still haven't left the circle." A murderous look entered Kowar's eyes. Turning to his men, he gave a single command: "Kill him." Without a moment's hesitation, steel was drawn as they moved to obey. But a figure suddenly appeared, blocking their path. It was Jillian. He declared in a voice like frozen steel that he would kill anyone who dared to touch Ghislaine. An immense pressure rooted them all to the spot, trembling in fear. Seeing this, Coer finally understood the true horror of his situation. Shaking, he slowly turned his head. His eyes locked with Ghislaine's in a silent final dare. As the next punch flew toward his face, an ironic smile spread across Coer's lips. He had stopped resisting, simply accepting the blows. In that moment, he remembered all the pathetic nobles he had broken in the past. The second he showed his fangs to those arrogant fools, they would immediately crumble and grovel at his feet. And Coer took immense joy in taking everything from them. That was how he earned his reputation as the rabid dog, by displaying overwhelming strength. But now he couldn't fathom how he'd screwed things up so badly with the rebellious Ghislaine. The ground was slick with blood, and Cow lay motionless, which deeply worried his people. Gizlin then wondered if that was enough. Suddenly, he spun around to the nearby mercenaries and ordered them to bring bandages and compresses. He explained that if Quiche didn't get help, he'd die. Hearing that, the mercenaries snapped back to reality, ready to follow Gizlin's orders. With silent intensity, Ghislaine's eyes returned to the young man, his gaze dissecting the entire situation. At Ghislaine's unspoken command, the mercenaries snapped into action, moving without a moment's hesitation. In the mercenary world, brute force was the only law that mattered, and Ghislaine was a master of asserting his absolute authority. When Carr was finally dragged before him, Ghislaine held out a contract, his finger tapping the paper as he ordered the coward to sign. The mercenary just stared, at first his defiance flickering for a moment, before clicking his tongue and scribbling his name on the line. He then carelessly tossed the document back, but this blatant show of disrespect did not sit well with Ghislaine. Finding the attitude insolent, Carr instinctively turned his head as Ghislaine demanded he take care of his men. Ghislaine agreed, his hand clamping down on Carr's, with a grip of steel, instantly terrifying the already beaten man. Squeezing tighter, Ghislaine declared them family now, and in his world, that meant they moved as one single entity. A few days later, mercenary groups gathered at the edge of the Perdium territory, grumbling about the early meeting, before they'd even had a chance to eat. Suddenly, one of them announced their new employer, the heir to the Duchy of Perdium himself. Greed instantly filled the air as many began scheming on how to fleece the rich young lord. But as some plotted, others listened in silence. A voice suddenly cut through the noise, declaring they needed a representative to handle this noble. To the surprise of many, the man who stepped forward was Gordon. He confirmed the job was real, noting with a smirk how they were always working hard to make their lives easy. The mercs grumbled about the last time. An idiot's unreasonable demands had soured the deal. Gordon suggested that this time they simply not cross the line of common sense. He offered to be their mouthpiece to subtly intimidate the employer, while the rest of them just had to back his play. Most of them agreed, confident that with Gordon doing the talking, they'd have complete control. But their scheming was cut short by a shout someone was approaching. A lone figure appeared on the horizon. It soon became clear that the single rider was none other than Ghislaine. They recognized him by his fine clothes and scoffed, mocking the noble for arriving all by himself.
Gordon waved a dismissive hand to his men, telling them to set the mood, while he taught this aristocrat a harsh lesson.
But just as he started forward, more figures crested the hill right behind Ghislaine. The noble hadn't come alone at all. Thanks to their distinctive elongated helmets, someone recognized them with a gasp, the legendary Cerberus squad. But no one could understand what had happened to these infamous rebels, seeing them ride so humbly behind an aristocrat. Soon, the entire group halted before Gordon. Ghislaine's eyes slowly swept across the mercenaries, his gaze weighing and measuring each of them. His eyes finally landing on Gordon, he asked if he was the one in charge. After getting a nod, Ghislaine demanded his name.
Gordon hesitated for a fraction of a second before introducing himself. At the sound of his name, Ghislaine paused, his sharp gaze locked on the man.
Then he delivered a light punch to Gordon's shoulder, stating that his reputation was impressive indeed. Ghislaine then gave his own name, and the shocking reveal that he was the heir of Perdium sent waves of disbelief through the crowd. Turning his horse, Ghislaine ordered all the soldiers to assemble, explaining over his shoulder that they were heading out to cleanse the forest of monsters. Soon, Ghislaine was preparing for the campaign, donning his battle armor. In his mind, all preparations for the subjugation were finally complete. A temporary expedition base had been established, supplies were secured, and the troops were restless and ready. Once fully equipped, Ghislaine emerged to face his new army. He turned to Belinda and asked for a final headcount. The numbers were in 150 mercenaries, plus 40 elite fighters from the Cerberus squad. After her report, Ghislaine confirmed that their position had been relayed to Estevan. Belinda had expected an objection, but the knight had even offered to cover their entry. With everything in place, Ghislaine commanded everyone to form ranks. Pointing a single finger toward the ominous woods, he announced their mission: they would purge that entire forest. He knew they had all heard the rumors. Tales of monsters' hidden secrets, and something far more terrifying lurking in the shadows. Realizing their objective, a wave of fear washed over the mercenaries, many believing they were marching to their graves. Belinda was outraged. Seeing them chatter during Ghislaine's speech, she moved to reprimand them. But Ghislaine stopped her, saying he wouldn't force anyone, but for those who succeeded, the reward would be triple the usual rate. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Such a payment was unheard of. Belinda was instantly furious knowing they had spent nearly everything on preparations. Gizlin coolly replied that it was to motivate the men. He knew that if they pulled this off, the returns would be more than worth it. He turned to his aide with a wry smile, asking if she believed in him now. With a heavy sigh, the girl admitted that she had no other choice. Even Cow chuckled at the outrageous promise, wondering how Gizlin could possibly pull it off. But Gizlin simply roared, addressing his soldiers. With a sweep of his hand toward the woods, he gave the order to advance. In an instant, the entire crew went to work, their blades tearing into the forest. The task was monumental, so even Gizlin himself waded into the fray. After slicing through a massive trunk, he sent it crashing down with a powerful kick. A triumphant grin spread across his face as sunlight finally broke through the dense canopy. Turning to his crew, he commanded them to keep pushing forward and clear the path. Gizlin remembered a passage from Dolphin's old records, stating this forest was so vast, it was once thought possible to drive out every evil spirit within it. But for now, their goal was much simpler. Secure the money, carve a direct route to the deposit, and crush the greedy ambitions of their rivals in Perdium. This profit was a matter of survival. Cower watched in disbelief as even their leader Gizlin began chopping down trees with his own hands. The mercenaries whispered amongst themselves, unable to tell if he was trying to inspire them, or just showing off his power.
Belinda overheard their muttering and shot them a sharp glare, ordering them to get back to work. She was clearly fed up with their lazy attitude and disrespect for Gizlin. She then approached Gizlin, asking why he was doing manual labor when he'd hired so many men for the job.
She worried they might see it as weakness, but Gizlin just shrugged it off, saying it made no difference. The more hands on deck, the faster they'd reach their goal. Belinda held her tongue, but a thought struck her. It was as if Gizlin knew every secret this place held.
Cower snickered from nearby, muttering about the lady worrying over the boss, while they were all just dogs being led into hell.
In a flash, Gizlin spun around, cracking Cow across the head with the very piece of wood he was holding. Without a word, Gizlin walked away, leaving Cow to seethe. Is he trying to pick a fight with me? Watching the scene, Gizlin thought to himself that so far, everything was proceeding perfectly. Delphine, the legendary conqueror of the kingdom, had made this very forest her first major conquest. At the time, Gizlin couldn't fathom why she'd focus on such a place. But her notes revealed the secret of the fossils, allowing him to prepare for this very expedition. And yet, this strange calm began to set him on edge. He possessed all the knowledge, but none of the experience. He called out, ordering everyone to stay sharp. The command came just as the woods grew thicker, forcing the men to spread out. As the darkness deepened, one of the mercenaries remarked that it felt like night had already fallen. Another scoffed, claiming the forest's terrifying reputation was nothing but exaggerated rumors. But in the middle of their chat, Gordon froze in his tracks, his eyes wide with shock. After a long, tense silence, he finally turned to his comrades.
Gordon stated the obvious, his voice trembling slightly. They had cut down an unimaginable number of trees to get here.
The others didn't understand his point, but they all agreed. So Gordon posed the chilling question. Then where's the path we made? The moment he spoke those words, every face fell in horror. Just then, Gizlin's voice sliced through the tension, commanding them to prepare for battle. At his word, the veteran soldiers drew their weapons in unison. But some of the newer recruits just stood there confused, asking why everyone was so tense. Gizlin locked eyes with Gordon, his voice low and serious. If you stay there, you will die. With a grim expression, Gizlin ordered him to back away slowly. Gordon didn't dare argue. Still holding the log, he began to retreat. But in that moment, he fumbled, accidentally slamming the log against a nearby tree. The sharp crack echoed through the silence, startling him so badly, he dropped the wood and hit the ground. The other soldiers cursed him, "Gordon, you idiot!" But no one was more terrified than Gordon himself, who whipped his head around, staring wildly into the trees. Yet, there was nothing. Only an unnerving silence. But it was too late. Everyone was on high alert now, a strange, creeping dread filling the air. Gizlin said nothing, his eyes scanning the darkness, waiting for the inevitable. But even in this suffocating tension, some remained arrogant. One mercenary scoffed loudly. "Look at him, scared of every little noise," he sneered, gesturing towards the trees. "There's nothing here but a bunch of lumber," he declared. Gizlin's gaze hardened. "You need to fall back too," he warned, "or you will both die here." But the mercenary just laughed. "Why are you trying to scare us?" he challenged. "Is it to make us easier to control?" In that very instant, something thick and powerful coiled around his waist like a whip. Before a single scream could escape his lips, the man was violently ripped backward into the shadows. Gizlin had known it all along. These were monsters whose presence could not be sensed. No one could have predicted the arrival of this predator, this entity that saw them only as food. Not unless you already knew exactly what you were facing. Gizlin's voice finally cut through the chaos, revealing the monster's name. It's an Ant Dino. And in that moment of horror, they realized the truth. They were already completely surrounded. Panic erupted as the mercenaries broke ranks, trying to escape. A primal fear took over. All they could think of was running for their lives, desperate not to become the next meal. Without even moving their bodies, the monsters shot out their branch-like tendrils, snatching several mercenaries out of the air in the blink of an eye. They were yanked into the monster's gaping maw. The only one to escape the pull was Gordon, who clung desperately to a nearby rock. One of his comrades rushed to his aid. "Hold on tight," he yelled, trying to hack through the thick living branch. He swung his axe with all his might, and a sharp crack echoed through the air. The branch was fine, but his axe had shattered to pieces.
Before anyone could react, Gordon's grip gave way, and the monster began dragging him down into the abyss.
He screamed in sheer terror as the others watched, paralyzed with fear. But in that instant, a figure charged forward. It was Gizlin. His mana-infused sword flashed, severing the massive branch in a single clean strike. Twisting in midair, he then plunged his blade deep into the monster's eye. Vile blood sprayed from the wound as both he and Gordon crashed to the forest floor. The soldiers stared in awe. Gizlin's attack revealed it all. The eyes were the creature's weak spot. "Snap out of it!" Gizlin roared, his voice shaking them from their stupor. He ordered them to form up and raise their shields, creating a defensive wall against the writhing vines. "Focus on defense and await my command," Gizlin shouted. Moving as one, the soldiers immediately formed an impenetrable shield line. At the same time, Gizlin sought out Coer. "The oil lamps," he demanded. "Tell me you have them." Once he confirmed the lanterns were ready, he revealed his plan: they would burn these abominations to ash. The soldiers were beginning to waver under the monster's relentless assault. Waiting for the perfect moment, Gizlin finally gave the order. "Launch the lanterns." At his command, a volley of fire soared through the air towards the beasts. But to their absolute shock, the monsters used their vines to swat the lanterns away. The mercenaries were stunned. At this rate, their fire strategy was completely useless. As the last lantern was smashed to the ground, the monsters retaliated with a furious storm of vines. But Gizlin moved like lightning, his blade a silver blur that effortlessly severed every incoming attack.
Belinda refused to stand by and watch. Taking aim, she unleashed her daggers, sinking them perfectly into another monster's eye.
Gizlin then ordered Belinda and Jillian to help Cerberus prepare a second volley of lanterns. He himself would be the decoy to draw their attention. Belinda's face filled with concern. "Please," she said, "be careful." A forest of vines shot towards him, but Gizlin cut through them with ease. Still, the onslaught was endless. He was forced to constantly stay on the move. As he pressed forward, he noticed something new. The monster was sprouting legs. The soldiers gasped in horror, sure that Gizlin would be trampled. But his reaction was instantaneous, his sword flashing as he severed the beast's leg clean off. He then leaped high, striking the creature directly in the eye. But as he dealt with one, the others swarmed his position. "Now," Belinda commanded the soldiers, "throw the lamps down." They reacted instantly, hurling the lanterns from above where the monsters couldn't reach. The creatures were instantly engulfed in flames. A massive cheer erupted from the mercenaries as they saw their attack finally hit its mark. "Don't stop!" Gizlin roared to them. "Keep attacking!" In moments, the entire battlefield was a raging inferno. The mercenaries were in disbelief, amazed that they were actually defeating these wooden nightmares. But a new fear crept in. The fire could consume the entire forest. Gordon, however, was just overjoyed to see the monsters were helpless against the flames. But Gizlin's sharp voice cut through the air. "Do not lower your guard, this is far from over." He then added, "Now they will reveal their true forms." As if on cue, thick steam exploded from the burning husks. Seeing the billowing steam, the soldiers' hearts sank, assuming the monsters had somehow put out the fire. Belinda and Jillian rushed to Gizlin's side. "What's happening?" Belinda asked anxiously. The boy explained that only the monsters' outer shells were burning away. As the fire hit their watery cores, the steam burst forth a smokescreen for their terrifying transformation. Unearthly shrieks tore through the air as the monsters revealed their new shapes. Seeing that they were still alive, the soldiers were paralyzed by fear. Gizlin grabbed their attention, raising his sword high for all to see. "Everyone grab your weapons." With a powerful downward slash, he parted the steam. "The real fight begins now," he declared before charging headfirst into the fray. Everyone else was frozen in shock at his sheer audacity. It was easy to talk about fighting, but to actually charge in alone was madness. However, Coer and the Cerberus unit followed without hesitation, overjoyed that they could finally join a proper battle.
Gordon even saw his own maid sprinting towards the front lines, her eyes filled with worry for Gizlin.
Jillian turned to the wavering mercenaries. "What are you waiting for?" he yelled. "That is our commander's order. We trust and obey." His words hit home. The mercenaries' hesitation vanished, replaced by a burning resolve to fight. They charged, putting their faith in Gizlin's victory. "Their shells are gone," Gizlin shouted. "They're vulnerable without mana. They're nothing more than giant scarecrows now. A single solid blow will bring them down." The hours that followed were a symphony of chaos and steel. Gizlin understood that uncertainty would lead them to their deaths, and his task was to dispel the doubts among those who followed him. So he constantly pushed forward to instill in people a faith capable of turning the impossible into possible. When the last monster fell, everything instantly went silent. Everyone was breathing heavily, whispering about how they had defeated those monsters and what would happen next. Without turning to the soldiers, a sound of heavy footsteps followed, and instantly all the soldiers lined up behind him. Gizlin said that even at the forest's entrance there were many monsters. Hearing this, everyone was scared, but Gizlin simply told them to trust and follow him. The mercenaries froze utterly arock by Gizlin. Then they pressed on, hacking their way through the forest. Monsters, music, they just fought him off. After each skirmish, Belinda tended to Gizlin's wounds. Suddenly they stumbled upon a monster that looked like a giant rat. Seeing it, everyone panicked, wondering when the monster encounters would ever stop. But Cow and Jillian didn't even flinch. They charged forward, taking point. In a flash, Cow closed the distance and severed one of the rat's legs. The rat stumbled. Jillian quickly covered its fangs with her shield, and Gizlin delivered the finishing blow. Gizlin asked if everyone was safe, and they confirmed it. One mercenary then barked at the others to stick close to their employer if they didn't want to end up dead. Jillian noted their good progress, and Coward chimed in. Practice makes perfect. After another quick fight, Gizlin ordered everyone to keep chopping trees. But among them all, one mercenary was absolutely terrified. He looked at the others thinking, these people are insane. Before long, the mercenaries reached a lake. Seeing the water, they all rushed to it. But Belinda wasn't sure if it was safe. Ignoring her, Gizlin figured everything was going according to plan so far. This lake was the main landmark on their path, so they decided to set up camp there. Chatting amongst themselves, the thieves realized the last 2 nights had been unusually quiet. When Mono suggested they all just slip away quietly, the mercenaries were outraged. He tried to explain that risking their lives like this wasn't worth it. Life couldn't be bought with any amount of money. Gordon countered that according to their employer, so leaving now made no sense. But Manos was furious that everyone believed the guy. He assumed Gizlin just wanted to curry favor by forcing them to clear-cut the forest. Another mercenary pointed out they'd already received an advance, and a mercenary's job is to do what they're paid for. Manos conceded Gizlin fought well, but still believed they'd just been lucky. He was convinced that when things got too dangerous, Gizlin would just use them as cannon fodder. Everyone fell silent. Manos intended to keep sowing discord, arguing that trying to defeat the monsters alone would be suicide. But suddenly a mercenary spoke up, saying that without their employer, they'd have been dead long ago. He then pointed at Gizlin. Gizlin himself had treated the mercenaries' wounds and given them advice on recovery. Belinda thought it would be better to keep the expensive medicine for herself, but Gizlin stated they brought the ointment to use it. After tending to one person, Gizlin called for the next. The mercenary asked if Gizlin would really spend expensive medicine on them, if he was just going to use them as cannon fodder. The others also agreed there was nothing to suggest Gizlin would abandon them. Manos was livid. That mercenary had just ruined everything for him. Gizlin told the others to stop talking and get some rest. Then he turned to Jillian and Kaur. Kaur asked if he was all right because if she were Gizlin, she'd have ripped Manos' tongue out. However, Gizlin told them to forget it. They had something more important to discuss. Gizlin revealed that just as he'd predicted ever since they entered the forest, monsters had attacked them day and night, but the last 2 nights had been eerily quiet. Hearing this, the others grew pensive. Jillian realized they had entered the territory of night monsters. Gizlin confirmed her suspicion, then turned to their quiet camp. He calmly stated they were in grave danger. Everything was calm, everyone asleep when suddenly a rustling sound broke the silence. Gordon's eyes snapped open at the sound. He saw a lamp flying straight at him. He reacted instantly, rolling away and avoiding injury, but then he immediately saw and felt something on his shoulder. Everyone woke up to a loud scream. They saw Gordon wildly swinging an axe trying to fend off something. He desperately tried to ward off the phantoms only he could see. As the men rushed to Gordon, he screamed that the monster was right in front of him, but they saw nothing, telling him he was imagining things, leaving Gordon to stare into the empty air in disbelief. The group began to leave, but a new band of mercenaries arrived, their grim faces declaring this was no dream. One of them sensed a chilling presence just in time to watch a lantern flicker and vanish into thin air. Unease spread through the camp as the mercenaries traded stories of the strange happenings that haunted the darkness. One swore they were being watched, if Gizlin confirmed with a grim nod. The moment Gizlin arrived, the crowd parted like the sea. With chilling calm, he commanded everyone to assemble. As their leader laid out his strategy inside the command tent, the mercenaries gathered outside, their faces etched with tension. Gordon's blood ran cold, learning they were completely encircled by an unseen enemy. Gizlin explained this was the monster's terrifying specialty. He suspected they'd been hunted ever since the lake stalked by creatures who truly owned the night. These beasts, the Fowlers, could melt into the very shadows. A wave of shock hit the mercenaries as they learned the creatures hunted in the hundreds, literally devouring the light. For Belinda, it all clicked into place. The mystery of the vanishing lanterns was solved. Cower insisted their only choice was to strike first. But Belinda countered a questioning if they could truly afford a reckless assault. Gizlin shot back that attacking blindly would only enrage the swarm. Yet Jillian was stunned to hear there might be a way to annihilate them all at once. Belinda had already been one step ahead, distributing the scrolls Gizlin had painstakingly prepared for every single mercenary. Now it was time for Gizlin to reveal his master plan. He explained how the Fowlers were methodically extinguishing their lights, boxing them in for the kill. And with their forces so desperately outnumbered, defending the entire perimeter was pure suicide. But Jillian's eyes lit up, realizing their camp's position by the lake meant their back was covered. They weren't completely trapped. A flicker of hope ignited. The situation wasn't entirely hopeless after all. In fact, Gizlin boldly declared that the initiative in this battle still belonged to them. His audacious claim left everyone speechless. Gizlin then laid out his strategy: divide the squad into 3 units. The defense team would become an unbreakable anchor. Shield bearers and crossbowmen would forge an impenetrable wall of steel, ensuring the enemy never breached their core. And at the perfect moment, the combat unit would concentrate all its power, launching a devastating blitz from the left flank. Kaur realized that if the central defense could hold this daring pincer movement, might actually succeed. But suddenly, Belinda's voice cut through the tension. She reminded them of Gizlin's own warning: attacking in the dark was futile. For a tense beat, all eyes snapped toward their leader. Breaking the silence, Kaur naively suggested they just use mana. Gizlin simply smiled, reassuring them not to worry. The magic scrolls were the answer. In an instant, the final pieces of the strategy fell into place. The last lantern flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. From the shadows, the creatures began their final approach. Stepping forward into the blackness, Gizlin recalled a vital entry from Delphine's diary. The Fowlers had one crippling weakness: they couldn't stand the light. Now! At Gizlin's command, every mercenary ripped their scroll in unison. The approaching monsters froze, looking up with a dawning, palpable dread. In the next instant, a cataclysmic flash of light engulfed the entire battlefield. The monsters shrieked and writhed in agony, their roars of pain echoing as the blinding light seared them. As the suffocating darkness was blasted away, the mercenaries braced themselves, knowing the monsters' true, hideous forms were about to be exposed. The light began to dim, and the crossbowmen instantly took aim, ready for the inevitable charge. They unleashed a deadly volley of bolts, obeying the stern command to hold their ground to the last man. At that same moment, Gizlin prepared to join the fray himself. He roared to his men, his voice ringing with triumph, that now they could finally see the true face of their enemy. With a unified war cry, they plunged into the chaos, and a brutal, bloody battle erupted. Leading the charge, Gizlin was the first to cut down the shadow beasts. He knew their strength was in the dark. Physically, they were fragile. With this weakness exposed, he gave a ruthless order: wipe out every last one of them. Nearby, Jillian became a blur, nimbly dodging a flurry of savage attacks. But the sheer number of monsters was overwhelming. Even he was about to be swamped. That's when Belinda appeared at his side, covering his back, her mission to carve a bloody path straight through the horde. After unleashing her own devastating attack, Belinda cleared a space for Gizlin, who moved like lightning, his blade a silver arc of death. For a moment, Gizlin felt a surge of pride. Perdium's finest warriors fought at his side, following his commands without a shred of doubt. They cut down scores of monsters, but the enemy tide seemed endless. There were still too many left. The mercenaries cried out in confusion, wondering where the endless stream was coming from. Their defensive line began to crumble as the monsters finally broke through. But just as despair set in, Gizlin and his elite unit arrived like a thunderbolt. After slaying the immediate threat, Gizlin praised his battered soldiers. The sight of their young leader sent a wave of relief through the ranks. With him here, they knew they could not possibly lose. Instantly, Gizlin commanded them to expand their formation to turn the tables and surround the enemy. Under the sudden, overwhelming pressure, the Fowlers, the hunters, began to scatter and flee. The mercenaries stared in disbelief. Gizlin's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a panicked retreat. It was tactical. These things were smart. He turned to Belinda with a new command: find their leader. It will be the one with horns. She proposed letting the monsters pass a tactical retreat. But Gizlin refused, stating they'd be hunted to exhaustion. With no strength for another clash, he declared they would end it all here. Hearing his cold resolve, Belinda fell silent. The man before her had changed. But there was no time for doubt. She snapped to attention and accepted the command. Her grappling hook shot out, biting deep into a tree branch. With a powerful heave, she launched herself high into the air. From her new vantage point, she could see the entire horde. Her eyes scanned the chaos, finally locking onto her target. She aimed true her rope, whistling through the air to ensnare the leader by its neck. At her signal, Gizlin's killing intent exploded. He prepared for the final decisive blow. In a flash, his blade struck with devastating force. The beast let out one final soul-piercing shriek as its life was extinguished. The other Fowlers wailed in fury, but without their alpha, their will was broken. "Eliminate the rest!" Gizlin roared. The soldiers surged forward, each warrior hungry for military glory. Their savage battle raged until the first light of dawn. Only then did Gizlin himself cut down the last of the Fowlers. As news of their hard-won victory spread, a thunderous cheer erupted from the exhausted troops. Elation swept through the camp. Gizlin's closest men rushed to his side, checking if their commander was unharmed. Gizlin praised their valor, then issued a grim order. The Cerberus squad was to scatter the carcasses around the perimeter, a gruesome warning to any other beasts. Gillian explained to Cow that when facing creatures as dominant as the Fowlers, a show of force like this was their only defense. Cow, however, bristled at being treated like a novice. Ghislaine reflected on the 10 long days they'd survived in this forsaken forest. With the Fowler threat now neutralized, all that remained was their true objective, the runes. He watched the sunrise, but an unshakable feeling told him their journey was far from over.
Belinda then delivered her report. 3 men were missing, but the core Cerberus squad had miraculously suffered 0 casualties.
Cow smirked. With a commander like him, he commented, I'm not surprised. Still, the fate of the 3 missing men was a mystery. Gordon pointed out Manos was gone, but no body had been recovered. Another mercenary scoffed. Running from a fight that's Manos all over? Frankly, no one was shocked. Meanwhile, the deserters convinced themselves of their genius. If they hadn't fled, they'd surely be corpses by now. As the others began to slow, Manos urged them on. Faster! Let the main group be the bait! But in that instant, his men froze solid. They completely ignored his desperate cries, which only infuriated the cowardly mercenary. At last, one of them raised a trembling hand, pointing into the darkness ahead. When Manos turned to look, his blood ran cold. A colossal monster was staring right at them. Sheer terror gripped Manos. It was the largest beast he had ever laid eyes on, and its gaze was unwavering.
Back with Ghislaine's team, the advance continued. Cow marveled at how the soldiers moved as one without a single wasted word. Of course, it wasn't long before Gillian began to pester Cow again.
Cow remarked that it would be a shame to dismiss such skilled mercenaries. But Gizlin stated he would hire them as his personal guard, challenging the belief that mercenaries were inferior to a regular army. Their recent battle had proven their worth. Just then, scouts returned confirming the monster corpses had been scattered as ordered.
Cow observed that the plan seemed effective. The forest had fallen eerily silent.
But Gizlan remained on edge, his instincts screaming that this peace was merely the calm before the storm. In that moment, Belinda appeared beside him. Her scouting mission was a success. She had discovered something just ahead. Hearing her words, Ghislaine gave the command to advance at full speed. And just like that, they had reached their destination. The sight that greeted them left the mercenaries utterly speechless.
Ghislaine calmly declared, "This is our objective." Cow was astonished, unable to believe something so precious could exist in a place like this.
Gillian simply reminded him that every last detail had been meticulously planned. How did you know? Belinda asked her commander. No one could believe the sheer quantity of runes. But their awe was shattered when a lone figure stumbled towards them, gasping, "You can't pass." Ghislaine's eyes narrowed with suspicion as the man suddenly collapsed, sending a wave of alarm through the mercenaries. They recognized him as Manos and rushed to help, but Ghislaine's sharp voice cut through the air. "Stop! Everyone fall back!" As he gave the command, a strange mist began to recede, revealing a horrifying sight. The ground was littered with countless bones. A shocked silence fell over the troop. They could only stare in horror, wondering what kind of massacre had occurred here. A palpable tension grew. Ghislaine said grimly, "Claiming these stones is going to cost us." The scale of the slaughter hinted at an overwhelmingly powerful monster, one not mentioned anywhere in Delhi's diary. He turned to give an order. But the words caught in his throat. Staring back at him was an enormous python, its ancient eyes burning with intelligence and malice. "Scatter now!" Ghislaine's command cut through the chaos, leaving no room for hesitation. In that same heartbeat, he was already moving, launching himself onto the beast's massive body and rocketing toward its head. But his devastating blow barely left a scratch on its impenetrable scales.
A gasp of disbelief rippled through the group. Not even magic could pierce its hide. The python lunged again, but this time it unleashed a spray of deadly poison.
Ghislaine twisted away, expertly dodging the toxic shower. But as he turned back, the colossal serpent was already coiling for another vicious strike. He reacted in a flash, parrying the blow, but the beast's immense tail slammed him to the earth, pinning him down. Seeing him trapped, panic flared in Belinda's eyes. The serpent thrashed wildly, forcing the mercenaries into a desperate dance of survival.
Belinda and Gillian scrambled to help the others flee the chaos. But all Ghislaine could hear were the terrified screams of his comrades.
He finally knew the owner of those precious stones. But he never imagined it would be a true forest sovereign. A beast like this should be in the deepest woods. Yet here it was holding nothing back. Still, they couldn't retreat now. To run would make this entire perilous journey utterly meaningless. Ghislaine's resolve hardened. Unleashing his manacores, a powerful aura exploded around him as he prepared for the real fight. The serpent struck with blinding speed, but the young warrior weaved past its deadly jaws and carved a deep gash into one of its eyes. Enraged, the beast retaliated with a crushing whip of its tail. The sheer weight of the attack was too much for him to handle. The monster unleashed a furious barrage of strikes, but Ghislaine, against all odds, managed to parry every single one. The odds of victory were disappearing, but he didn't care. His unshakable sense of duty forbade him from backing down. In that moment, every soul on the battlefield was frozen. All eyes were locked on the lone warrior standing against the behemoth. The grueling battle was draining his stamina at an alarming rate. For a tense moment, both he and the python stood perfectly still. Ghislaine knew the truth. His mana would vanish long before he could slay this beast. Just then he heard footsteps. His comrades were approaching.
Gizlin, fall back.
"We'll hold it off," Belinda cried out, but he roared back, "Stay where you are." His command stunned them all. "Why?" they demanded, utterly confused. Jillian pleaded, "What are you saying?" He explained that against a monster of this caliber, he couldn't guarantee their safety, and he refused to lose a single one of them. When they asked about his own fate, he simply said, "I can handle this alone."
Belinda knew their survival was already a miracle. Why was he pushing himself to the brink? At that very moment, the serpent's monster's jaw gaped open.
"Run!" Gizlin screamed a final warning. But to his utter shock, the mercenaries didn't flee. They moved to protect him. "We fight together," they declared with newfound resolve. "We've never served a leader as noble as you, Gizlin." Kior even chimed in, "Let's just kill this thing and claim the treasure for ourselves."
Jillian proposed a plan to create an opening in its defense. "Trust us." They all urged, their eyes burning with determination.
Gizlin fell silent, his heart stirred by their loyalty. Then, shocking everyone, he began to analyze the beast's strengths. "It's enormous venomous, and its scales are nearly indestructible. One mistake and we die." Belinda's heart swelled, moved by his leadership. He continued, his voice steady. "But it's not invincible. It has a wound, and one eye is already gone. And when this is over, we will all return home together." Those words ignited a fire in the mercenaries' souls as they held their defensive line.
Kior charged forward, landing a painful blow on the raging serpent.
Before the beast could recover, Gizlin was already moving, aiming for its other eye. The python had no time to react. Gizlin knew that even the most perfect strategy could crumble in an instant. But if he faltered, everyone would perish a price he refused to pay. Now, blind, the serpent shot upwards in a final desperate attack. The weight of the future he alone knew pressed down on him. And in that terrifying instant, the python swallowed him whole. Despair washed over the battlefield. Their leader was gone. But then, a blade erupted from within the snake's own flesh, and just like that, covered in venom and viscera, Gizlin carved his way out of the monster's belly. Seeing this impossible feat, they knew. Gizlin was the future of Perdium. Meanwhile, back at the castle, nobles fumed over the young lord's reckless independence.
"What good is your anger now?" another count scoffed. "He's been in that forest for 2 weeks.
If only Scoven hadn't deceived them, they could have stopped this madness long ago.
Lord Perdium listened to the complaints in silence. His expression was grim, his thoughts consumed by the fate of his son.
Suddenly, the doors burst open. A knight rushed in, shouting, "My lord, you must see this with your own eyes." The shocking news was then delivered. Gizland had returned. Meanwhile, the young man was already marching to the castle. Before long, he stood in the lion's den, facing the Council of Counts. Facing everyone, including his own father, Gizlin offered a formal greeting. He then apologized, his voice firm, insisting he had no other choice. But the council erupted in fury, seeing it as nothing but blatant disobedience. One of the knights was incandescent with rage, arguing that it wasn't just Gizland's life on the line. The entire county was now at risk from monsters pouring out of the forest. But Gizlin's retort was sharp and clear. "I am alive, and the monsters have not invaded." Hearing this, a count sneered. "Do you find this amusing, boy?" He spat that even if things turned out fine, there was no excuse for such treachery. A letter was thrust forward. It seemed the count had grown suspicious after Gizlin's meeting with Amelia. He had investigated what truly happened, and as a result, he broke the engagement and cut off all their aid. Gizlin's eyes scanned the page. There was no doubt the letter was real, so Amelia was willing to side with his enemies just to see him ruined. This meant his leverage over her had vanished completely. If Gizlin had been even a moment later, he would have been trapped. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" a lord demanded. Others clamored for the money to be returned to the Raffords, wailing that such a fortune could have sustained them for ages. Gizlin's reply dropped like a bomb. "I've already spent it all." He revealed the funds were for his expedition into the monster forest. The moment he uttered those words, a deathly silence consumed the room. Gizlin bowed his head. "I am sorry. I have no excuses." In a flash, a hand grabbed his collar. "What kind of heir single-handedly destroys his own county?" the man roared. Another lord stepped in, declaring Gizlin was no longer an heir, but a criminal. But Gizlin's voice cut through the chaos. "What is the meaning of this?" his father demanded. At his signal, Gizlan called Belinda into the chamber. The girl placed a heavy box on the table. When the lid was opened, every single expression in the room changed. Gizlin presented them with a box overflowing with high-quality runestones. They stared in absolute disbelief. Such a treasure was supposed to be impossible. Stunned, they accused him of using Amelia's money. But Gizlin calmly corrected them. He had discovered a massive runestone deposit deep within the forest. One man scoffed that the profit from this paltry sum wouldn't even maintain the mansion. Gizlin chuckled. "You're absolutely right." However, that was far from the only ace up his sleeve. Outside, his mercenaries were hauling crate after massive crate of the glowing stones. The sheer volume was unbelievable, all of it extracted in just 2 weeks. Belinda confirmed every last stone came from the expedition. But beyond simple wealth, Gizlin declared that every action he took was for the good of the entire county. The lords told Gizlin's father this fortune would be enough to sustain them for generations. They were all in shock. Their desperate struggle for survival was finally over. Instantly, the mood shifted. Hands that were ready to strike now patted Gizlin's shoulders as the lords showered him with praise. "You must be exhausted," they fawned, but he silenced them with a single look. "I have several conditions." He demanded the full release of Scovanen and Ricardo, who were simply following his orders. Furthermore, access to the monster forest would now be open to all. Any more needless rumors, he warned, would only harm the county's future. And finally, he declared he would lead the mining operation himself and recruit his own mercenaries. The council recoiled. This was tantamount to him building a private army. They sputtered that he should be begging for forgiveness. But instead, he was demanding total freedom and power. Gizlin shot back that he was creating a future where they would never again have to depend on the Raffords. And if their petty complaints delayed his progress, the county's finances would suffer for it. With that, all eyes turned to Gizlin's father. Right on cue, his mercenaries approached and bowed respectfully to Gizlin. A man named Jillian requested further instructions, as the loading was nearly done. Another asked what to do with the remains of the giant python. Gizlin ordered them to separate the venom blood meat and skin at once to prevent the valuable materials from decomposing. A lord named Randolph admitted Gizlin's mercenary force was impressive. They couldn't fathom how the young heir managed to unite such powerful warriors. Staring at his son, the lord remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "It must have been difficult to subdue these men." Gizlin's reply was immediate. Without them, none of this would have been possible. His father turned and dismissed the council. To Gizlin, he said he would turn a blind eye this time, but he gave a stern warning. If he ever disobeyed an order again, there would be consequences. For that, Gizlin could only honor his father's memory. At long last, the mansion belonged to Gizlin, a fortress that truly held the spirit of the North Wolf. The North Wolf was a title bestowed upon the lonely guardian of the Lawania Kingdom's northern frontier. Gizlin's father stood alone against the darkness. His military strength was meager, yet he fought on separated from his beloved wife and son. As a tribute to that sacrifice, Gizlin declared their work complete, ordering everyone to prepare to depart at a moment's notice. But his retainers urged caution, pleading with him not to be so reckless. He needed to rest. Belinda reminded him of how hard they'd worked to cleanse the poison from his system. He simply turned to her, a faint smile on his lips, and said he was counting on her before walking ahead. News of the extracted mana stones would spread like wildfire. Gizlin knew they had to become so powerful that no one would dare make a move against them. However, with that one thought, his strength gave out and he collapsed. Soon, whispers echoed through the region, confirming the partial development of the monster forest. The time had come. A war against the degrades had to be declared a topic that ignited furious debate at the strategy meeting. No one knew how many of their people were still trapped within those corrupted lands. A scout then reported 2 vassals, and a knight remained. If the degraded prince fell within Perdium territory, it would spark an all-out territorial war. Sam was assigned to lead the operation. A wave of shock filled the room. No one expected them to play their trump card so soon. One lord immediately objected, arguing that such a decision was far too hasty. But the response was chillingly simple. The monster forest had changed everything. The decision came from Dolphin himself. Desmond's voice boomed, silencing all dissent. "Prepare for war." Then he asked if anyone else truly grasped the gravity of their situation. When Amelia learned what had transpired, her world shattered. She buried her face into her assistant's shoulder, her body racked with sobs. She had even swallowed her pride and begged her father to withdraw his support for Perdium. But he had coldly told her she wasn't acting like herself. Hearing those words again, the girl sighed, admitting she'd let her emotions run wild. But what was done was done. Her knight looked to her, waiting. "My lady, your orders." She stated that the mana stones would save Perdium from financial ruin. The only problem, they had no way to sell them yet. They had only just been unearthed. Amelia knew there was only one place in the north to sell such a treasure, the massive Crimson Tower. These stones were absolutely essential for magical research. The magic towers took their supply lines with deadly seriousness. The target was no longer Gizlin himself, but the caravan transporting the stones. A man pointed out that 2 towers existed in the north. Focusing their power on just one seemed foolish. Amelia scoffed. Gizlin would never deal with the other tower. Its glory had long since faded. Her plan was set. She would strip Gizlin of everything he had. Meanwhile, our hero remained lost in darkness. Within his slumber, the memories returned. He remembered the suffocating moment he was trapped inside the great python. Before the beast could swallow him, his mana dissipated the venom on contact, but a toxic miasma remained. Gizlin fought desperately to hold on to his consciousness. Everything he held dear was riding on this expedition's success. Unable to avoid the poison completely, he focused the venom that had entered his body, concentrating it in his mana core and forcing it to rotate. In a stroke of genius, Gizlin converted the deadly poison into a volatile fuel one that could withstand a mana explosion. In that instant, his eyes snapped open. He was alive. As he pushed himself up, his mind was a blur. He could barely recall what happened.
Then his eyes landed on his sister. The moment Helena saw him awake, she rushed to his side explaining he had collapsed right after returning.
But all that mattered now was that he was okay. She was just so relieved.
Gizlin was silent for a moment, completely stunned.
But as he tried to speak, Helena abruptly shoved him back down, then bolted from the room, screaming that he was awake. Gizlin frowned, realizing with a jolt that he'd been unconscious for 2 entire days.
He had pushed his body to its absolute limits, but his young vessel simply couldn't endure that level of strain.
And yet, his body felt surprisingly powerful. This level of regeneration shouldn't have been possible in just 2 days. His recovery rate had improved dramatically, and the volume of his mana had skyrocketed. To Gizlin, it felt as if the very nature of his mana had been fundamentally rewritten. He instantly understood his power had merged with the Python's energy. He'd never heard of anyone growing stronger this way. It turned out the life or death gamble had paid off spectacularly. If he could master this new power, he could become dozens of times stronger. But first, he had to deal with the aftermath. After 2 days, the entire world would know about the stones. Gizlin knew he had to gather mercenaries, and he had to do it now. At that moment, Gizlin called for Belinda to enter. But she wasn't the only one who walked through the door. Right behind her was his father. The Lord's face was lit with pure joy seeing his son finally awake. Gizlin, however, froze in complete shock. His father explained that Belinda had told him everything. The harrowing battle with the Python and the relief that Gizlin was safe.
But Belinda's gaze remained worried, recalling how he had collapsed so suddenly.
Lord Perdium cut them off with a grave tone. "We need to talk." It seemed he had a request for his son. Gizlin was stunned to hear it. He found himself in a situation he'd never experienced before.
In the past, he actively dodged his father just to escape the endless lectures.
His father apologized for their last encounter, but Gizlin brushed it aside. "It's fine," he said, getting straight to the point. "What is it you need?" An intense silence filled the room. Then his father looked away, a distant memory in his eyes.
Gizlin suddenly knew what this was. His mother's words echoed in his mind, warning him his father was not an open man.
He remembered his surprise when she spoke so frankly. She said his father constantly buried his true feelings deep down. The only time he ever broke that wall was the moment he confessed his love for her.
That was why she begged Gizlin to understand him, even if he seemed cold. He was just a man who didn't know how to express his heart.
Gizlin's body tensed when his father commanded him to raise his sword. He didn't protest, readying himself for combat.
Without a signal, the battle erupted. Lord Perdium attacked first, and they exploded into a deadly dance of feints and counters.
Gizlin expertly parried a relentless storm of attacks from his father.
Creating some distance, they paused. Gizlin noticed his father's sword was unbelievably heavy.
This blade could crush countless foes, yet it was slender enough for the most agile defense. In the hands of a true warrior, it was a terrifying weapon. The Lord struck with all his power, but Gizlin deflected the blow, ready to launch his own fierce counter. In response, the two rivals locked eyes, cautiously reading one another. In the end, neither could claim victory. Their blades were pointed at each other's throats. A perfect stalemate. His father finally spoke. "You've grown strong." Gizlin thanked him, but remained tense. He braced himself for the lecture that was sure to follow. "Ease the pressure when you cross swords with someone," his father advised. Gizlin mulled over the words, and then it hit him. This was the first time anyone had ever given him a proper lesson. His swordsmanship was born from pure survival. It was raw instinct. He'd never had formal training, so he knew he was missing things. He had always fought alone, but it felt good to be taught. Reading his son's thoughts, the man's face turned stern once more. This is a reprimand. Regardless of Gizlin's achievements, he had to follow the proper way. Gizlin understood. Without order, there is only chaos.
Finally, his father admitted it. "You have changed a great deal." Gizlin's eyes widened in surprise.
His thoughts immediately returned to the heavy duty on his shoulders. The people of his lands? He had to protect them. Then he remembered his father's request. A long, awkward silence stretched on as his father hesitated to speak. Finally, he asked sheepishly if Gizlin had any extra funds. The mercenary camp near the Forest of Monsters was in need.
When Gizlin returned to his people, he asked how they were faring. A thunderous, unified cheer erupted. "Everything is going wonderfully well."
They all asked after his health, but he assured them he was much better. Suddenly, he turned to Jillian. "How is Rachel?" The man paused, his eyes filled with emotion. He never believed his daughter could actually recover. Gizlin smiled, genuinely happy for him. Then his expression grew serious. "I have something to tell you all. Our estate is in grave danger." He explained everything. Their enemies' plot to spark a war, and how he found the Prince of Gradia on the brink of death. As for the forces targeting Perdium, he suspected they had been watched for a very long time. Belinda finally understood the urgency. Cor just grinned. "Life with you is anything but boring." Jillian realized the truth. The estate is a perfect target. It was vulnerable yet filled with priceless resources. Gizlin could only agree.
"We must warn everyone," Belinda urged. But Gizlin refused. A spy, he explained, had likely been among them for years.
And now that they had found the stone, an attack was imminent. He looked at them all. A fierce battle awaits us. A heavy silence fell over them. Kor broke it with a smirk. Just give the order. We promise not to let you get bored. Jillian stepped forward, his voice unwavering. We have already entrusted our lives to you. We are ready to follow you to the very end.
Belinda agreed, her hand resting on her sword. I want to protect you too. He chuckled at their fiery spirit. His greatest enemies, Duke Dolphin Desmond and Amelia, would soon feel his wrath.
Gizlin declared their next destination the Scarlet Flame Tower.
Belinda questioned the choice. The Crimson Tower had better rates, but Gizlin knew this path held fewer complications.
Jillian saw his point, reasoning that an attack was almost certain. Gizlin was also aware the Scarlet Flame Tower was desperate to restore its former glory.
But there was another far more important reason he had chosen this specific tower.
A young wizard waited within its walls. The girl patiently watched for the light her teacher promised would one day shine upon them. Before long, the mercenaries were left breathless by the towering structure. The city itself was a shock, a world completely different from Perdium. Mages casually strolled through the streets. The mercenaries could only gawk in wonder. But the mages' expressions hardened the instant they laid eyes on the newcomers. In perfect unison, they unleashed their magic and simply vanished. The mercenaries gasped, shaken to their core. Gizlin realized in that moment they were utterly unwelcome here. Despite the chilling atmosphere, Belinda noted the tower itself appeared pristine. Gizlin had to agree. Everything seemed disturbingly normal. Everyone remarked on the tower's impossible scale as they finally reached its massive base. Suddenly, Belinda noticed a terrifying absence. There were no gatekeepers. Instead, suits of armor were strewn haphazardly across the ground. A voice then boomed from high above. In that moment, the mages forbid the travelers from taking another step. In the next instant, the discarded armor began to move. Gizlin declared to the mages that the true heir of Perdium stood before them. He then requested to speak with the head of trade, but the mages retorted that they weren't buying a single thing. Belinda was seething. They didn't even bother to glance at their cargo. The mage scoffed, preparing to expel the travelers by force. But the young girl, now furious, snapped at them, demanding they come down at once. They all looked to Gizlin for what to do. He calmly asked the mage if they were absolutely sure they wouldn't buy what he had.
After he revealed the stone, the mage was blinded by its light, utterly stunned.
He was instantly convinced it was a legendary runic stone. He knew exactly what treasure they had brought to sell. A smirk played on Gizlin's lips as the mages immediately apologized for their rude behavior. The sales manager quickly introduced himself to Gizlin. Gizlin stated that their shipment was colossal, so he needed someone with true authority to oversee the deal. The manager was shocked. He was asking for someone with a rank equal to or higher than the Tower Lord. He agreed to relay the message to the bishop and had the guests escorted to another room.
Belinda smiled, a hint of irony in her eyes. She questioned if it was truly worth it for them to insult entire nations. But a loud explosion suddenly erupted. When Gizlin questioned it, he was told such sounds were normal during magical research. When their guide opened the door, the room was choked with thick smoke. He immediately grew furious. He scoffed at a young girl, saying she didn't even know how to perform magic, yet still demanded a researcher position. The other mages couldn't fathom how they could accept a failure like her into their ranks. Breathing heavily, she declared that she too had the right to visit the laboratory. But he merely smirked upon hearing she was also a mage. Suddenly, he sneered that she should be able to use protection spells. And now he wanted her to block his attack.
Seeing this, the girl was instantly terrified. At that very moment, the girl reached out, desperate to cast a protection spell, but she couldn't. Fear consumed her. Just then, with a flick of his sword, Gizlin managed to repel the attack. The mages were stunned when they saw him. Gizlin, clearly annoyed by the tower's methods, asked if this was how they conducted their research. The Lord was shocked to hear they were running low on runes. He fumed that this would only widen the chasm between them and the Crimson Tower, reminding them he had already ordered reserve stones. The mages muttered to themselves that every time they wanted to spend money, the cash always ended up on entertainment and luxury. Another mage pointed out that the ruler of that tower was in the 7th circle, while theirs was only in the 6th, but the bishop had forbidden him from bringing it up. The ruler was furious because his rival seemed to have bought up all the stones in the entire region. Just then, the manager burst into the room. The bishop was outraged by the abrupt interruption, but the manager informed them that a massive shipment of stones had just been delivered. Everyone was utterly stunned by the news. Meanwhile, the arrogant mage was still battling Gizlin, but our hero couldn't care less. He effortlessly parried all the mage's attacks. Then a huge jet of flames was aimed at him, but Gizlin easily swatted that away too. The onlookers were mesmerized by his skills. Suddenly, something began to wrap around the mage. Unnoticed, Belinda had snuck up behind him and demanded how he dared attack their master. Just then, the bishop arrived, demanding to know what kind of mess they had made. He saw his student being tied up by a guest and another drawing a sword. The girl flinched, her eyes wide with alarm, but Gizlin calmly told Belinda to release the man. The mage scrambled to the Lord, overjoyed to be free. He cried out that he had been viciously attacked. Trembling, he insisted the fragile Vanessa couldn't possibly enter the lab, fearing for her safety. But Belinda just scoffed, calling him a pathetic little girl. Vanessa shot back that she absolutely needed a lab. Gizlin watched the chaos unfold in silence. This Vanessa, it turned out, was a true force of nature. Gizlin was shocked that a monster like her had endured such a difficult past. The Lord's face, however, twisted with rage. Not only had they dared to trespass in his sacred tower, but Belinda shot back, asking what choice they had when his own people threatened them. Gizlin finally stepped forward, apologizing for the late introduction. He presented himself as the heir of Perium, and declared he was here to sell them stones. At those words, the bishop froze, completely taken aback. The student was equally stunned to see Gizlin here on a merchant's errand. Gizlin explained his men were outside guarding the merchandise. He invited the mages to see for themselves, and they cautiously followed him out. They were left absolutely speechless by the mountain of mana stones before them. The mages couldn't believe their eyes. Where could he have possibly found so many? They wondered what they were supposed to do with such a haul. Finally, the Lord beamed, declaring it a gift from the heavens. With this treasure, they could finally crush the Crimson Tower for good. Or so he thought. He immediately changed his tune, claiming the product was scarce and the quality looked rather poor. Cow's face flushed with anger at the insult to their wares. Vanessa argued that even one cart would last them for weeks, but the Lord barked at her to be quiet. He sneered, saying she did nothing but make life difficult for everyone. Through it all, Gizlin simply watched a ghost of a smile on his lips. The ruler then turned to his mages, demanding they agree with him. They quickly concurred that on second look, the stones were indeed subpar. Belinda exploded with fury, yelling that they had clawed their way through hell and back to acquire those stones. But the mages coldly retorted, "And what difference does your hardship make to us?" Gizlin figured the deal was off. But then the Lord exchanged a knowing glance with his mages, and suddenly announced they were willing to buy the batch anyway. The Lord proclaimed that in a show of great generosity, he would purchase all of their goods. But Gizlin cut him right off. He ordered his men to unload just one cart, adding that was all they ever intended to sell. The mages were caught completely off guard, their faces a mask of confusion. Coward let out a triumphant laugh, claiming he'd forgotten that detail. As the Lord sputtered in indignation, Gizlin smoothly explained it was all a misunderstanding from his subordinate. He casually mentioned they had only stopped by to earn a little pocket money for their travels. At that, Gizlin let out a small chuckle. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted and they were seated at the negotiation table. The Lord introduced the tower elders, boasting that all of them had reached the legendary 5th circle. Gizlin replied that it was indeed impressive, but only what he'd expect from the second most powerful tower in the north. The Lord insisted any rumors Gizlin might have heard were false. Belinda silently wondered why he felt the need to keep provoking the man. The bishop decided to cut to the chase and talk numbers. In response, Gizlin simply held up 2 fingers. He wanted double the market price. The mages erupted in outrage, accusing him of not knowing his place. The Lord lectured him on the basics of negotiation, but Gizlin fired back that the price wasn't for the stones, it was for the tower's future. The mages were once again aghast at his audacity. The Lord simply sighed, dismissing him as a thoughtless, arrogant youth. Gizlin received the insults with unnerving calm, his silence more powerful than any words. The bishop continued his lecture, saying they were willing to forgive the boy's youthful ignorance. He offered a price barely above market value. Gizlin stood up, announcing he saw no genuine interest, and that they would just leave. He turned his back, leaving the Lord utterly flustered. The man scrambled to stop him. Seeing the Lord's panic, Gizlin let out a knowing smirk. The others could only watch as the master negotiator worked. In the end, the bishop caved, agreeing to double the price. Gizlin was pleased but held his ground. Only 1 cart. The bishop pleaded, saying they were ready to buy everything, that they hadn't brought it all for nothing. Gizlin coolly mentioned that the Crimson Tower would likely pay triple the price. It would be far more profitable to just go there instead. The Lord hissed that Gizlin was pushing his patience to its absolute limit, so Gizlin began to walk away again. The man finally screamed that he would buy it all for triple the price. A wide smile spread across Gizlin's face. He was glad they finally understood each other. The Lord told the boy to wait right there while he went to retrieve the fortune. Inside, the Lord knew that despite his high rank, he was dancing on the palm of this young man's hand. But then Gizlin spoke up. "Oh, I haven't told you all of my conditions." The Lord's temper finally snapped. That's when Gizlin delivered the final blow, demanding they hand over Vanessa. The bishop was completely stunned by the insane request. Gizlin simply repeated his demand. He wanted Vanessa to become his personal mage. Around a crackling campfire, his men feasted on roasted meat. One of them declared it was time they hunted bigger game themselves. His companion exploded in fury, silencing the complainer with a single furious glare. Suddenly, the topic changed. Had Gizlin heard the tale of the sorcerer who set northern Luania ablaze? Gizlin's interest was piqued. The Scarlet Disaster? A 7th circle magic user. Now that sounded promising. The man explained that the girl had lost her mind, becoming obsessed with the forbidden art of mana cultivation. Even as a powerful mage, she wreaked havoc, razing the manners of lords to the ground. Hearing this, Gizlin grew silent and thoughtful. Then it struck him like lightning. She reached the seventh circle through pure cultivation, not the traditional path. It was a tempting power. He'd even suggested recruiting her before, but her uncontrollable magic made it too dangerous. And yet she had succeeded. She reached the seventh circle. This time, Gizlin was determined to make her his. His men scoffed, thinking she sounded weak. But the mages eagerly agreed to the trade. To them, Vanessa was completely useless anyway. The Lord consented, but Gizlin wasn't done. He also required mages of the third circle or higher. The Lord's eyes widened. A territorial war, Gizlin announced, was on the horizon. The air in the room instantly grew heavy with tension. Gizlin pressed his demand. In addition to Vanessa, he wanted several other third circle mages. The room was filled with shocked gasps. The Lord's face twisted, his fury building. He would not tolerate such a blatant mockery of his authority. A wave of power erupted from him, shattering the windows. He fixed his gaze on the young man. "Do you take me for a fool?" He reminded him of his ancient law. Mages assigned to the tower are forbidden from joining territorial wars. Gizlin had insulted the entire tower, but under the crushing pressure he remained perfectly calm, his eyes like steel. "You," he warned, "will regret this." He then revealed his trump card. His lands held dozens of times more mana stones than they had brought. The mages were utterly stunned. Gizlin simply added that word was already spreading across the entire north. The Lord retorted that every greedy fool would flock to their lands. "Exactly," Gizlin said, "which is why we need the tower's help to secure our claim." The man's eyes widened when Gizlin offered custom deliveries exclusively for their tower. It was only a matter of time, he declared, until the Scarlet Tower rose to the top. The Lord glared at the outstretched hand, his face a mask of bitter resentment and distaste. But after a tense moment of deliberation, he finally accepted Gizlin's terms. Immediately afterward, he summoned a young mage named Alfoy. The deal was done. He announced that Alfoy would lead the squad, framing it as an act for the common good. The young man, flattered by the praise, puffed up with pride. The Lord promised it would be valuable experience, but gave Alfoy his true mission: ensure Gizlin never trades those stones with anyone else. All the young man had to do was be patient, for just 1 year. Alfoy hesitated for a moment before agreeing with the bishop. It was a decision he would almost immediately begin to regret. The moment they arrived in Perdium, the other mages scoffed at the shabby castle. Alfoy, however, stayed silent. He privately thought the place was a dump, but held his tongue out of respect for his lord. He introduced himself, but Gizlin bluntly stated they had a lot of work to do. As Gizlin looked around, Alfoy seethed with silent rage. How dare this commoner treat him like a mere servant? Suddenly, Gizlin turned to him, his voice sharp. "Where is Vanessa?" Alfoy carelessly replied. She was probably in the back with the luggage. Just then, a young woman appeared, struggling beneath a mountain of bags. She looked completely exhausted from the long journey. She stumbled, almost collapsing at Gizlin's feet as she offered a weak greeting. When Alfoy grumbled about her slowness, Gizlin's voice cut through the air. "Drop everything. Come here." Before Alfoy could even finish his complaint, a powerful blow sent him sprawling into the dirt. As Alfoy stared up in fury, Gizlin's voice was like ice. "Vanessa no longer belongs to your tower." He declared he might overlook Alfoy's arrogance, but he would never permit anyone to bother Vanessa again. Seeing this, the girl's face flushed with embarrassment. Alfoy, however, was absolutely livid at the humiliation. He shot to his feet, demanding to know how Gizlin dared to strike a third circle mage and the heir to the tower. The aristocrat had crossed the line and was about to attack, but Gizlin just clicked his tongue in annoyance and snapped his fingers. Instantly, every mercenary drew their weapon. The mages were outraged, but Gizlin reminded them of the contract. Alfoy was now his to command. Alfoy was seething with rage, but he had no response. He was utterly defeated. "If you want respect," Gizlin said coldly, "you'll have to earn it." Alfoy bristled, enraged at being dismissed as a mere reserve unit. As he left, Gizlin ordered his men to show Alfoy how things worked around here. One mercenary chuckled, "Life in the tower must be soft." As two burly mercenaries loomed over him, Alfoy felt a true chill of fear. And from the sidelines, Vanessa watched, with an expression of complete indifference. Gizlin stepped closer, his sudden proposal catching her completely off guard. She averted her gaze, the bitter truth of her magical block surfacing once more. But with a knowing smile, Gizlin simply urged her to follow. He vowed to help her unlock the vast potential sealed within. Before long, they stood in the heart of the training grounds. Her eyes scanned the area, unimpressed. Gizlin then questioned her on her studies. It turned out she had mastered theory up to the 5th circle. Gizlin's eyes widened in genuine awe. But Vanessa's gaze fell as she confessed the bitter truth. She couldn't cast a single spell. He asked if there was a reason for her block. She explained that after her teacher tragically passed away, she was certain that was why she had been cast out. Gizlin fell into a thoughtful silence. The 5th circle, a level of power on par with the tower's greatest elders. She understood the theory perfectly, but her body refused to obey. But all her effort wasn't for nothing. She just needed to walk an entirely different path. He recalled Claude's words dismissing Vanessa. The man had thought she was simply crazy. But now, Gizlin was determined to teach the girl mana cultivation. The very idea stunned her. She couldn't understand why she would need such a thing. But Gizlin explained that everything was connected, a path she had never once considered. Suddenly a wave of fear
washed over her. That method was pure madness, but Ghislaine pleaded for her to just try their gazes locking in that moment.
Vanessa considered his insane proposal. Could she truly wield magic? Her hand clenched into a tight fist. Until now, her life had been a string of failures. Ghislaine recognized those eyes from a past life. Eyes filled with regret, yearning for a power that only pushed her deeper into an abyss. But this time, he knew how to save her. He would not let her fall again. He reached out a bridge between two souls. Ghislaine began to channel his mana directly into Vanessa's body. A sudden warmth spread through her from the inside out. He warned her to stay silent, lest she break the delicate flow of power. His mana was now inside her, he explained, mapping every circuit before returning to her core. The entire room erupted in a blinding pure light, and a memory shattered through her consciousness. She saw her teacher fiercely defending her, but the Lord's voice was cold. She lacked the essential spark. What kind of mage can't even cast a single spell? The bishop agreed, sneering that any investment in her was a complete waste. Vanessa watched her younger, helpless self. And then another memory, a kinder one with her teacher. She sobbed, saying if she were more talented, he wouldn't have been forced to leave the tower. But he gently denied it, saying he was just taking a trip, telling her not to cry. He promised that no darkness could last forever. He vowed that one day the truth would shine like a beacon, and that beacon was Ghislaine. In that instant, she understood. Her teacher was right. Finally, a hand had reached for her in the dark. She could finally feel the sun's warmth. Just then, a sudden clamor erupted from a nearby building. Inside, a brutal brawl had broken out between travelers. One of them masterfully goaded his opponents, who foolishly took the bait, attacking with full force, but the warrior dodged their blades with contemptuous ease. He moved like a blur. Grabbing the first attacker, he hurled him aside like a rag doll and dropped the second in an instant. They crashed through the tavern wall with devastating force. He chuckled, complaining he hadn't even warmed up. His allies laughed, calling the defeated men worms, ruining their feast. In this place, they were the law. Nearby, another of their companions was fishing quietly. They asked if his training went well, but he cut straight to the point. What was the mission? The man revealed an order had come down from Desmond. Hearing that name, his demeanor changed instantly. He donned his helmet ready for war. This place was getting boring anyway, he muttered. Meanwhile, the grave news reached the lands of Perdium, and Ghislaine's father's expression turned grim. A letter had arrived accusing Ghislaine of murdering Gilmore de Grad and vowing revenge. Enraged by the blatant fabrication, the Lord ordered the soldiers summoned. His men agreed. This was a clear attempt to provoke a war over nothing, but the Lord knew they had to maintain a careful facade. Suddenly, he received another report. Their people needed a specific stone. Ghislaine had been certain the vassals had leaked information about the recent changes. The others were furious at this clear act of betrayal. The Lord mused that sometimes even doing what's right for the land can lead to one's own ruin. But it seemed Ghislaine had anticipated this all along. One knight boldly declared that their forces and lands far surpassed the Degrads. But their confidence was shattered by an urgent interruption. Scavin burst in with more dire news for everyone. He confirmed the Lord's suspicion of a conspiracy. The enemy had appeared right on their border immediately after the declaration of war. Next, he reported the enemy's numbers and their advanced weaponry. The power gap was utterly overwhelming. Panic began to spread like wildfire. But Lord Perdium's voice roared, snapping everyone back to their senses. "Enough," he roared. "This bickering wastes precious time we need for our defense." The civilians were evacuated without delay. Then came the grim announcement. The war had officially begun. Approaching the fortress, he coldly mused how his own son lacked talent. But his death had served its purpose, igniting this war. Even Count de Grade couldn't help but admire the castle's might. Perdium whirled on his brother, his voice sharp with disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" But Degrad's accusation cut through the tension. His son was murdered on this very soil, and the killer he claimed was Perdium's own heir. He made an offer: surrender now and no more blood will be spilled. Gizlin watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. The surrounding lords, however, erupted in absolute outrage. Gizlin understood this clash was inevitable. They brought siege weapons. Their true intention was nothing short of annihilation. Then word reached him his father was defending Gizlin's son. That was Perdium's final defiant answer. For a fleeting moment, that defiant tone caught de Grad off guard. Sam could only stare, awestruck by the Grand General's powerful presence. Degrad smirked, expecting nothing less from the legendary Wolf of the North. He turned away, sneering, "Don't you dare regret this!" His chilling laughter echoed across the battlefield for all to hear. One knight desperately pleaded for orders, but others urged caution, trying to prevent the inevitable clash. The lords protested with all their might, but Perdium remained a statue of silence, chaos clouding his judgment. And just like that, the battle cry sounded, revealing an enemy force that was more than prepared. He was frozen, paralyzed by the suddenness of it all. But Gizlin's voice sliced through the noise. Prepare for a siege. His father stared at him stunned. Gizlin laid out the grim reality. Their numbers are more than double ours. Once those siege weapons are ready, they will unleash their full might upon us.
Gizlin declared their only path forward was to call for aid and hold the line at all costs. His father shot back. Even if that's true, what is our next move? I see no clear path to victory. A faint smirk played on Gizlin's lips. He leaned in and whispered his strategy. The old lord said nothing, just stared at his son in utter disbelief. Gizlin was betting everything on one audacious gambit that could turn the tides. It was time to gather his key players and reveal the plan. But Jillian's mind was blank. Kower was lost in heavy thought, and Belinda was still reeling. The war had truly begun. Stepping forward, Gizlin prepared to lay out their desperate course of action. We will strike their supply lines before they can dig in, Gizlin declared. But Belinda questioned the move, how every enemy eye is fixed upon these walls. Gizlin simply turned his calm gaze toward Kower and Jillian. Kower reported with precision. Just as Gizlin commanded, troops were already positioned deep within the forest. The requested Antidro spark cloaks were ready for deployment. Small camouflaged units can easily sabotage their rear, Gizlin explained, then turned to Belinda. But we lack the location of their supplies. I need you to be my eyes. The young woman was taken aback by the weight of such a critical mission. To infiltrate an enemy camp was a death sentence. But Gizlin's faith in Belinda was absolute. Now only one piece remained, the trump card that would end this war for good. A few days later, the enemy's supply camp was established far in the rear. Its commanders grew complacent, pleased with their seemingly impenetrable position. One of them was already fantasizing about the lands he would claim as spoils of war. Then, figures emerged from the gloom, arriving right on schedule. A thick fog had rolled in, providing the perfect cover for an ambush. Gizlin surveyed the scene. The conditions are perfect for an assault. His order was as cold as steel. Take no prisoners. Eliminate them all. In the blink of an eye, before the sentries could even raise an alarm, shadows descended. The guards were cut down where they stood. The rest of the camp scrambled for their weapons, but it was useless. They were mercilessly slaughtered before they could even mount a defense. Gizlin's roar echoed through the carnage. Against this scum, formalities are meaningless. Word finally reached the Baron that they were under attack. He scoffed. Do not fret, we have 1,000 soldiers here. But his subordinate knew better. Gizlin's elite squad moved like phantoms, dealing death with brutal efficiency. The subordinate tensed his mind, racing for a solution. But in the next instant, his comrade was struck down beside him. Startled, he collapsed to the mud-soaked ground. Belinda's eyes narrowed. She recognized him instantly as Pablo's vassal. The man's face twisted in pure terror when he saw her. Moments later, the entire camp was engulfed in flames. Belinda reported to Gizlin. Pablo didn't just leak the information, he personally led them here. Hearing this, the exposed traitor began to grovel for his life. Who bribed you? Gizlin's voice was ice. The man shrieked, It was Desmond, then foolishly tried to add a threat. And with that, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Desmond had sold them out, handing their forces over to the degrades. Meanwhile, the traitor desperately tried to curry favor, dismounting to bow before Gizlin. Mistaking silence for mercy, his face lit up with foolish joy as he thanked him. But without a single word, Gizlin's blade flashed. The man's head tumbled to the ground before he could even register what happened. Gizlin would never make a deal with a traitor. After all, in his world, betrayal had only one price: death. As the enemy camp burned to ashes, they prepared to move out. Belinda glanced at Gizlin, who had just received his orders returned to the castle immediately. The main assault on the fortress had likely already begun. A surprise attack from the rear now would shatter the enemy's formation. He divided his forces with tactical precision, giving the left flank to Kower and Belinda, while reserving the right for himself. He then faced Jillian, entrusting the enemy's very heart, their base, to him. Jillian accepted the perilous mission without a hint of hesitation. Belinda then asked the crucial question, who would hold the main gate? His reply was a riddle that no one present could decipher. In the heavy silence, he turned to his comrades, a confident smile on his face, declaring this war would forge a new legend. Prepare for the assault, Lord Perdium commanded. Crossbowmen rushed to the ramparts to unleash a volley of death. But it was too late. The enemy had already breached the walls. An overwhelming tide of foes swarmed over them, forcing everyone into a brutal, bloody melee. As the battle raged, he realized the outcome was already decided. Even Sam knew. This was the final stand for the North. He once held on to a flicker of hope, but watching the chaos, the truth became undeniable. Perdium had been driven into a corner. A soldier screamed that the gates were about to fall, but the Lord's command was like steel. Forget the gate, defend the walls. Skaven delivered the final crushing blow. No reinforcements were coming. In their most desperate hour, they had been completely abandoned. Suddenly, a soldier sprinted toward Degrade, his face ashen with terror. The report he carried was catastrophic. Their supply lines were cut. The supply detachment had vanished, a clear sign of disaster. Degrade was in disbelief. How could Perdium have found their hidden camp?
Worse still, a pillar of smoke was rising from that very location, confirming his deepest fears.
Degrad panicked, demanding to know what they would do, but Sam just slapped him hard across the face, declaring, "Supplies are now irrelevant."
Degrad was stunned silent by his chilling confidence. By sunset, Sam vowed, turning his cold gaze to the fortress, that castle will be ours. He was a veteran of 100 wars. The flank attack was in motion, but the walls were holding stronger than expected. But the central gate, it stood completely undefended. In a flash, the enemy's entire strategy clicked into place. "All troops," he roared, "charge the gate!" His command thundered across the field. "Breach the central gate." He then paused and summoned a single trusted warrior. A soldier named Id stepped forward. The enemy's tactics made no sense. They should have been reinforcing the gate, yet they continued to scale the walls. Meanwhile, Perdium was a whirlwind of destruction, felling soldier after soldier. Then, Scovin's urgent cry cut through the chaos. Monstrous siege towers were rolling toward them. To their absolute horror, the towers were a perfect match for the height of their walls. "Prepare the catapults!" Perdium roared instantly. By a stroke of luck, their setup had just been completed. They fired desperately, trying to shatter the towers before they reached the walls. The projectile soared. But just before impact, a lone figure smashed it out of the sky.
Perdium was utterly aghast. He didn't recognize the warrior at first, but then their eyes locked in a stare of chilling familiarity.
It couldn't be. "Sam!" The traitor's voice echoed across the battlefield. "Your downfall was always destiny, Perdium." He then ordered the battering ram forward its target set on the main gate as his warriors stormed the castle walls from the towers. Inside near the shuddering gate, a few soldiers stood guard. Nearby, the mages were bound and helpless. Alfoy struggled furiously, demanding their release. "We will not be sacrifices." But a knight coldly ordered him to be silent. "Are you mad?" Alfoy protested. "Letting that battering ram get this close is a death sentence for us all."
Despite his panicked shouts, Vanessa remained strangely calm. "Do not worry," she said softly. "Gillian has a plan for everything."
Her calm only enraged Alfoy further. "A plan?" he screamed, but Vanessa's voice was firm. "Gillian is a man you can trust." Her mind flashed back to just days ago when he had begun teaching her a new form of magic, revealing only a fraction of its true power. Vanessa had apologized for her slow progress, but Gillian simply encouraged her. He then led her outside to show her a secret. A strange construction was underway. Vanessa watched confused as they buried a massive runic stone deep in the ground. Alfoy had suddenly appeared then, demanding to know the purpose of Gillian's strange excavation. Gordon had intervened, leaving Vanessa even more bewildered. But Gillian had simply explained this is merely preparation. He knew the gates would fall, and yet he was certain of victory. As Vanessa remembered his words, the pieces of his grand design finally clicked. She understood what he was planning, and the terrifying truth was she wasn't sure she had the strength to see it through. But Gillian's faith in her was absolute. Focusing, Vanessa poured her energy into the magic circle, making Alfoy gasp. "Is that a mana transfer circle?" Completely focused, the young mage recalled Gillian's words. She could do this. She had to. Meanwhile, the relentless pounding on the gate was the only sound, until Randolph spotted movement in the distance. A relief force was approaching at full gallop. Oswald's heart soared as he recognized his own son leading their most elite troops. At that very moment, a messenger frantically delivered a report to Victor. They were being ambushed. From two directions at once, it was Coer and Belinda carving through one flank, and Gillian himself tearing through the other. Caught completely off guard, the enemy soldiers fell into chaos. Their efforts against Gillian were utterly futile. They called him a monster for a reason. With a single command from Gizlin, the Perdium soldiers rose. The hour of the counterattack in Take had finally arrived. Their strategy was perfect, encircling the invaders within their own territory. At that very moment at the Degrad base, Gizlin declared he would personally hold the front line, ordering Gordon and Thorin to crush the enemy's flanks and shatter their entire camp. The mercenaries' loyalty to Gizlin burned like a wildfire. Count Digrad was utterly speechless. How had they organized such a devastating counterattack? His knights frantically tried to shield him, but Gillian was relentless. Axe in hand, he pointed and roared, "There is the enemy leader! He is to be taken prisoner!" However, his path was blocked by the cold steel of an elite knight. Gillian knew instantly this was no ordinary foe. The Lancer praised their courage, demanding Gillian's name before they began their duel to the death. But the mercenaries' reply was pure ice. The dead have no need for names. Meanwhile, on the west wall, her mana threads ensnared their foes, allowing Cower to cut them down. Belinda complained. "Did I really have to get this dirty?" He shot back. "Just dodge. We can't afford to stop moving." On the east wall, Gizlin himself was a whirlwind of pure destruction carving through the enemy ranks. They would use the invaders' panic to ensure not a single one survived the day. An enemy commander screamed in outrage. "How dare you turn your backs on this battle?" A wall of lancers moved to intercept Gizlin's charge. He whispered to his warhorse, "It's time to dance." And the beast obeyed, weaving through the forest of spears with otherworldly grace. The soldiers were so stunned, they never even saw Gizlin's attack coming. He locked his legs around one soldier's neck, using him as a pivot for a devastating spinning attack that sent everyone around him flying. Heads flew and bodies were torn asunder. But Gizlin knew the situation on the wall was far worse than he had imagined. At this rate, the defenses would crumble long before they could open the main gate. Even with their ferocious assault, the enemy's overwhelming numbers were a crushing weight. One false step would be their end. "Stop him!" the enemy commander shrieked. "Do not let him advance another inch."
Gizlin knew his time was running out. Before the wall gave way, he had to end this. Pouring aura into his colossal blade, he decapitated the first soldier in a flash. The second fell with a gaping hole in his chest, and the third died without a sound.
Ducking under a hail of arrows, Gizlin thrust his blade straight through the commander. He then used his weapon to vault to the top of the wall, where the enemy army's grand captain Victor watched. He was impressed one man had crushed his entire camp. The gate, however, remained sealed. A soldier reported the gate was stronger than expected, needing another 10 minutes. But Victor's command was ice. "Do it in 5. He would personally handle the enemy captain threatening to execute his own men if they failed. But Kowar stepped forward. "You're not going anywhere. Our leader wants to have a little chat with you." Victor was a true veteran. His warhorse lashed out with a brutal kick, killing Kowar's mount instantly and sending the mercenary tumbling. But the king of mercenaries was quick, landing on his feet in an instant. He was stunned, however, as Victor parried every single one of his strikes with chilling precision. Victor just scoffed. Mercenaries playing at being warriors. The captain's next blow didn't just push Kowar back. It shattered his blade and sent him flying. As Victor sneered, Kowar knew. This man's power was on another level entirely. It was just as Gizlin had warned him. His name was Victor the Degrad family's ultimate weapon, a warrior stronger than anyone Gizlin had ever known, except for Gizlin himself. Victor planned to smash the defenses with his overwhelming power. But if he abandoned the gate, Perdium's entire strategy would collapse. And that's why Kowar could not back down. His only mission held Victor here no matter the cost. With a defiant grin, Kowar spat. "This truly is one hell of a cursed mission." Across the field, another duel raged as Adam locked down Jillian. Jillian's frustration was mounting. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. But Adam's colossal shield was an impenetrable fortress, absorbing every ferocious strike. Jillian had never faced such a perfect defense. Seizing a split-second opening, Adam slammed his shield down with crushing force, pinning Jillian to the ground. And in that very moment of defeat, a thunderous crash echoed across the field. Perdium's gates had been breached. Vanessa finished siphoning the last of the mage's mana, hissing, "Just a little more?" Victor's voice boomed. "The gates are open. All units charge." "Bring Count de Grad to me," he roared, seizing full command of the invasion. But Kowar slowly rose to his feet again. Not yet. He refused to let Victor escape his grasp. The enemy captain sneered. Why would this mercenary leader throw his life away when their defeat was already sealed? Meanwhile, Adam gloated to Jillian that the gate was breached. They had lost. He admitted the rear attack was a nuisance, but the end result would be the same. Perdium's greatest error was believing mere mercenaries could fill the void left by true knights. They were no match for the elite. Both Victor and Adam had fatally underestimated their opponents. But Cow rose to his feet, declaring it didn't matter if they were mercenaries or knights. Jillian finished his sentence, his voice cold as steel. "In battle, you either win or you die." Adam scoffed, refusing to argue with the beast. But as the warrior lunged, spear abandoned, Adam stared in disbelief. "How dare you call yourself a simple mercenary?" Desperately blocking an axe that threatened to split him in two, Jillian replied, "No matter how perfect the defense, there is always a crack." His sole purpose now was to serve as one of the young master's blades. At the same time, Kowar analyzed Victor's monstrous power. He could not afford to die here. He remembered a lesson from Gizlin, asking how the young master had ever won that impossible bet. Gizlin taught him the secret wasn't in the movement, but in the mind. You must understand what your enemy expects you to do. Victor taunted him, "You fight like a cornered animal." "They will always underestimate you," Gizlin had said. In that instant, Coward's attacks became utterly unpredictable, punctuated by a thrown dagger. Victor sneered. He claimed that fools like Cowier, who believe they have nothing to lose, always make the most reckless choices. And those choices lead straight to their graves. But if you can hide your true goal until the final moment, that is exactly what Coward did. He seized Victor's arm, using the weight of the captain's own armor against him. The target wasn't Victor himself. Using his sword to pivot in midair was a move Victor never saw coming. Even on the brink of death, the mercenary had forged a strategy, a desperate gambit only one who was prepared to die could ever conceive. The captain admitted it then. Cow wasn't just some wild beast. He possessed true talent. Facing death can push a warrior beyond their known limits. Victor felt a pang of regret for misjudging him so severely in their short time as foes. "You have earned the right to your last words." But as Cow smirked, shimmering threads erupted from the shadows, ensnaring him just as Belinda pulled him from the captain's fatal strike. It was all a feint to buy more time, and the plan had worked perfectly. Victor realized the attack was too bizarre. If it weren't for that woman's intervention, Cow was no fool. He wouldn't trade his life for a single blow unless it served a much greater purpose.
This was all part of a larger strategy. A horrifying thought struck Victor. If he didn't get inside those gates right now, something catastrophic was about to happen.
He saw her then, Vanessa channeling an immense surge of power. Ghislaine's plan was brutally simple. Let the enemy breach the gate, let them crowd the entrance, and then turn the tables with her magic. She had asked if she was capable of such a feat. Ghislaine had only replied, "I trust you." The magic circle pulsed, radiating an overwhelming torrent of mana that could be felt even before the spell was unleashed. A cataclysmic inferno erupted, swallowing the entire entrance, and vaporizing soldiers who hadn't even set foot in the castle. The sight was both terrifying and magnificent. The few survivors scrambled desperately trying to outrun the flames of hell, but they were instantly turned to ash. Gizlin intercepted any who escaped, ordering his men to surround the gate immediately. "No invader leaves this place alive." Victor watched in horror as a sea of fire consumed the bulk of his army. The captain's mind reeled in fury. They had meticulously planned this war for years, predicting every possible move. And in a single moment, a mere mercenary and one terrifyingly powerful mage had shattered it all. This was far too perfect to be a coincidence. Victor finally understood. They had walked right into a trap. "Retreat, regroup outside the forest," he roared, believing they could still salvage the situation. But when he sent a soldier to find Adam, he saw his subordinate's severed head being held aloft by Gillian. The mercenary's voice echoed across the battlefield. "Adam's forces are annihilated. It is time for you to surrender, Victor." "This war is not over," Victor bellowed, his voice raw with rage. He swore he would tear Gillian's head from his shoulders. This was no longer war. It was personal. Just then, Perdium's forces launched a devastating counterattack, cutting off any hope of escape for Drad's soldiers. "This is our chance, turn the tide," Gizlin commanded. As Belinda appeared, he gave a thumbs up, confirming he was alive. Belinda let out a sigh of relief. "If we were any later, you would have been a corpse." "I admit I thought your plan was idiotic," she said. But Gizlin simply smiled. "And yet, it worked." Belinda swore she'd never attempt a stunt like that again, reminding him their victory was only possible thanks to the accumulated crystals. But when Gizlin heard Gillian's name, a chill went down his spine. He took off immediately. Gillian was facing Victor, all alone. Victor's blows landed like thunderbolts. He was without question the enemy's apex warrior, a monster of pure strength and speed. Steel bit deep into Gillian's shoulder. The mercenary had to admit his opponent's superiority. Seeing no opening, Victor scoffed. He spat, calling him a damned mercenary. Then, with almost no effort, Victor's blade hooked Gillian's axe, tearing it from his grasp. The next strike would decide the battle. But even as steel pierced his body, Gillian twisted at the last possible instant, deflecting the blow just enough to protect his vital organs. Victor's eyes widened at his tenacity. Now he understood how this man had managed to kill Adam. No one had ever endured his attacks for so long, but Victor saw it as pure folly. Wasting so much energy on Adam, only to face him next. He declared that the mercenaries had taken Adam's life, and now he would take Gillian's. But Victor's final killing blow was shattered by a greatsword that whistled through the air. It was Gizlin. Gillian let out a sigh of relief. He had held on just long enough, creating the perfect opening for his master's arrival. Gizlin scooped up the fallen axe. Victor's eyes narrowed, recognizing the young man's distinctive black armor. Gizlin roared, activating his mana core's overload and charging forward like a beast unleashed. The blow nearly shattered Victor's defenses, who barely managed to counter. They exchanged blows at a blinding speed. Even a surprise aerial attack from Victor was blocked effortlessly. He was stunned, never expecting such skill. At this rate, he would die. Victor couldn't believe someone so talented even existed in Perdium. But Gizlin revealed a chilling truth. He knew Victor intimately. His strength, his strategy, and even the secret elite battalion he once commanded. He knew everything. Realizing he was trapped, Victor did the only thing a cornered animal can. He attacked with all his might. He couldn't fathom how some kid from Perdium could know so much about him. As Gizlin's axe swept in a hair's breadth from slicing his neck, they engaged in a deadly dance. A swift kick from Gizlin shattered Victor's balance. Gizlin strode closer, remarking that while he appreciated the axe, a weapon of its caliber required a true warrior to wield it. Victor snarled, "Who in the hell are you?" The youth simply introduced himself as the next in line for the Perdium succession. Victor scoffed in disbelief. The great knight of the north was being pushed back by some arrogant punk. Gizlin confirmed it, promising to show him who the real greatest knight of the north was. Victor took the bait, deciding it didn't matter how the kid knew so much. In war, you use every trick to win. All that matters is being the last one standing. He channeled every last drop of aura left in his body. Gizlin merely nodded, activated his own mana core, and lunged in for the final attack. As the Perdium family reclaimed their territory, the final showdown raged on amidst the flames. Blades sang in a furious symphony. Victor's technique was perfect, but Gizlin was faster, more agile, and full of dirty tricks. Scrambling onto his opponent's armor, Gizlin delivered a brutal kick to Victor's face, sending him reeling. The captain still managed to land a shallow wound on Gizlin, but the youth simply danced out of the way. It was a battle of brains and brawn, and if victory depended on sheer determination, Victor never stood a chance. Gizlin seized him by the neck and hurled him away, giving him no time to breathe, even resorting to throwing sand in his eyes. A memory flashed in Gizlin's mind. In his previous life, it was Victor who had appeared to stop him.
After countless clashes in that other timeline, Gizlin had finally killed him, but it had taken far too long.
That delay allowed more enemies to emerge and destroy the Perdium family. Now his resolve was absolute. Anyone who threatened his family would face only one fate death. His strike ran Victor clean through. With his dying breath, the captain gasped out again, asking who in the hell this kid was. Gizlin replied that the Gizlin Victor knew or thought he knew was nothing but human trash, but that version of him no longer existed. He admitted the fight had been fun, and with that, the Perdium family claimed victory. Gizlin and Jillian returned wounded but alive. Everyone waited with bated breath. When Gizlin asked if everyone had survived, his men rushed to him, erupting in cheers for his incredible leadership. They had never witnessed a war like this. Gizlin simply thanked them for their support. Kior joked, asking if old man Jillian was crying over a little scratch, to which the mercenary replied, it was nothing. But Belinda warned that they were both bleeding heavily. She explained that Vanessa had fainted from complete mana exhaustion just like the other mages. Randolph hugged Gizlin, but the young man's true concern was for his father. Lord Perdium approached in silence and pulled his son into an embrace, telling him he'd done a great job. He admitted that when he first heard the plan, he thought it was utterly ridiculous. But it had worked, and that's what mattered. Gizlin humbly replied that the plan only worked because his father had protected the walls, putting his absolute faith in him. Lord Perdium, however, denied the praise, insisting all credit belonged to his son. Raising Ghislaine's arm high, he proclaimed Perdium's ultimate victory as the crowd roared. But in Ghislaine's mind, even with the battle won, the war was far from over. The real target Desmond had to fall. Randolph looked to him asking, "What's our next move?" Lord Perdium ordered Gizlaine to gather his men. A mountain of work awaited them, but for tonight it was time to rest. Gizlaine refused instantly. There was no time to spare. They needed Count de Grade to formally surrender, and they needed it now. He proposed a bold strategy. He would take his mercenaries directly to the Count's domain, and demanded his father grant him authority as the substitute lord. His father argued back. The war just ended. You and your men must be exhausted. There's no need for such haste. But Gizlaine insisted, his gaze like steel. The war isn't over. It was Count de Grade who broke faith and started this conflict. Give the enemy time to breathe, and they will only rise to strike us again. Lord Perdium fell silent, then finally agreed. He authorized their departure, right? But he added one condition. Don't forget that Count de Grade was once an ally. At least show him the courtesy of a formal reception. Ghislaine simply told him not to worry. He turned to his comrades. Cower, Belinda, can you still move? When they confirmed, he gave the order, you're with me. With a thunder of hooves, they tore across the land, riding for de Grade County. There, the white flag of surrender was already raised. Count de Grade stared in disbelief, wondering how it all went so wrong. They had planned everything in secret with Desmond's help, and still they had lost to those damned Perdiums. He ordered his servant to prepare for negotiations, planning to buy his way out with compensation. He was sure the Honorable Lord Perdium would easily accept giving them time to recover from the crisis, and pin all the blame on Desmond. The subordinate dared to ask, but my lord, where will we find the money? We've spent everything on the war. The Count's face twisted in fury as he grabbed the man's throat. We'll squeeze it from the people. Their importance is nothing compared to mine. They are pigs living in the mud. He slammed his subordinate to the ground, barking orders to get moving at once. The terrified servant knew this tyranny would not last. An internal rebellion was surely brewing. Just then, a soldier burst in with devastating news. Perdium's forces were already on their land. They were here, ready to negotiate. The Count panicked. They had arrived far too quickly, shattering all of his plans. Still, he assumed he would at least be dealing with the old Lord Perdium. But when the doors swung open, it was Ghislaine who strode in. Are you ready to surrender? He asked, his voice dripping with ice. The Count demanded, why are you here and not your father? Ghislaine's retort was colder still. My father is busy rebuilding everything that you destroyed. That is why I have come as the temporary substitute lord to accept your surrender. Hours earlier on the road, Cower had scoffed. So that fat Dagrid coward scurried home? What kind of leader abandons his men and flees like a rat? Ghislaine noted to himself that he would have to check those details with Jillian later. Cower then asked if they would actually let the Count live through negotiations. Ghislaine explained that while de Grade had tried to wipe them out, simply killing him could create a political nightmare, especially since the war began over his son's death. Cower grumbled that he was overcomplicating things, suggesting they just attack and seize the territory. But Belinda shot back that mercenaries weren't nobles, and not every problem could be solved with a brawl. Cower argued, everyone is human, so why do nobles have to be so different? Don't worry, Ghislaine told them, cutting through the argument. I was just quoting what my father would do. Now de Grade is ours to handle. Back in the present, Ghislaine gave a chilling order. Remove this man from my sight, immediately. The disgraced noble was literally carried out, screaming for them to take their dirty hands off him. Belinda asked if they could really do that, and Ghislaine confirmed it without a flicker of doubt. The Count continued to protest, but Gizlain's blade was suddenly at his throat. He was branded a traitor blinded by greed and for the enemies of Perdium. A wave of pure terror washed over the Count. Gizlain's voice was deadly calm. Since you risked so many lives in this war, it's only fair you put your own on the line as well. Realizing this insane kid was actually going to kill him, the Count shrieked, "Wait, I'll pay! I'll offer you my entire territory!" The room fell into a shocked silence. It's just as I predicted Gizlain thought. Of course he'd choose that over dying. He remembered that by law, inheriting a territory required blood ties to the current owner. It wasn't something that could just be given away. The Count promised desperately to find a way, suggesting they invent a story that Gizlain was a distant, long-lost nephew. He screamed at his subordinate to get a pen and paper immediately. The Count kept begging, offering any financial compensation if Gizlain would just wait. He pleaded for mercy. Gizlain asked, "Is your life so precious that you would trade your own territory for it?" The people of Dagrid could only watch in confusion as their Count was thrown to the ground like trash. The arrogant noble sneered. Why was he forced to stand among such filthy commoners? Gizlin's voice was ice warning him to watch his tongue. Those very people were now his lifeline. Turning to the crowd, Gizlin began his address. "My name is Gizlin Perdium." The Count waged a foolish war over his son's death, and he was utterly defeated. "Now he dares to settle his debt using your hard-earned money," Gizlin's voice boomed. "Who among you will stand with me?" But the people roared back in defiance. They declared that a noble like him could fend for himself. Gizlin, representing Perdium's leader, offered to save the Count by settling his debts. The Count raged, questioning how they dared to humiliate him so. In response, a storm of stones rained down as the people screamed he'd stolen bread from their children. Too many had suffered because of his greed, and in that moment, the Count was consumed by the fury of his own former people. With that, Gizlin declared the war finally over. He spoke of his father to Belinda, who instantly knew he had a grander scheme in mind. Later at Perdium Castle, Lord Perdium was in shock. Gizlin confirmed the news Count de Grad was dead. His father demanded if he'd forgotten his orders to show respect. Gizlin replied he had not, but adapted to the battlefield. To spare the Count would have invited another attack. Dagrid had marched on Perdium with 7,000 soldiers, an army far too vast to be his alone. Desmond had supplied the troops, and Leopold had helped command them. A wave of disbelief filled the room, with Homer asking if this was about that incident. Gizlin suspected they'd killed the messengers. But now that Degrad's territory was theirs, the entire game had changed. They now possessed a direct path into Perdium's domain. Lord Perdium accepted this reality, but questioned how Gizlin could claim the territory without a blood connection. With a confident smirk, Gizlin presented a document. It named him as a distant nephew, and the sole heir to all of Degrad's lands. A perfect solution to prevent any disputes over his claim. Lord Perdium warned him that ruling a territory was no simple task, questioning if Gizlin had the resources for such an undertaking. His son assured him not to worry, for he had the perfect person for the job. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Saren, a man was caught cheating at dice. His opponent growled, asking if he knew the fate of cheaters. Claude just laughed, telling him to relax. It was all in good fun. Later, Gizlin stood to receive his well-earned honors. Lord Perdium praised his achievements, and in the name of the king, bestowed upon him a new title. Baron of Fenris. The crowd roared, "Long live the Baron!" Just moments before, Gizlin had pointed to the map, showing how the county was made of 5 baronial lands. He declared his intent to rule from the very center of it all. With no objections raised, Lord Perdium granted his wish, praising his strategic mind. He mentioned the territory's financial strain from the war, suggesting they sell their magic crystals. But Gizlin warned him none remained. They were all destroyed at the gate. He vowed, however, to acquire more. After the ceremony, Belinda proposed a celebration. Gillian proudly congratulated his young master, quickly correcting himself. "My Lord Baron," Coward remarked with a grin that the boy was finally growing up. Belinda recalled wondering what he'd become smiling, as she thought she'd raised him well. Coward teased that's exactly why he was so spoiled. Belinda cheered for his incredible new rank. Just then, Helena arrived, carrying someone declaring she would now call him Lord Gizlin, not brother. He waved away this stuffy formality. Noticing she held Rachel, he warmly asked the young girl how she was feeling. Rachel spoke to him casually, and Gizlin told her if Helena gave her any trouble, she should speak up, or even smack her sister. Gizlin turned to Gillian, noting how much healthier his daughter looked. Then he called for everyone's attention. He announced their base would no longer be in Perdium. They would cease being mere mercenaries, and become the foundation of his personal army. They would be trained as knights, an honor they had earned with their courage on the battlefield. Belinda immediately worried about the astronomical costs. But Gizlin explained that's precisely why they must push themselves to new heights. He announced that Gillian, now fully recovered, would command the men of Fenris. Gillian asked if his master would not be with them. "Not yet," Gizlin replied. "There's a place I must visit first." With the war over, lawlessness was spreading, and he intended to handle it himself. He declared that Gillian was the man he trusted above all others. Gillian was stunned, his heart swelling with emotion. Gizlin then revealed that Belinda and Cao would join him on a journey to Austin territory in the Kingdom of Sun.
Belinda's eyes lit up at the prospect of traveling to a whole new kingdom. Cao eagerly asked if this was the territory famous for gambling, hoping to try his luck. But Gizlin crushed their excitement, warning this was no pleasure cruise.
Elsewhere, Vanessa was desperately pleading with Alfoy to drain just a little more mana from him to test her spells. The terrified mage adamantly refused. But Vanessa insisted their master himself had called him a fountain of boundless mana. Just then, Gizlin appeared, remarking on the lively morning chaos. Alfoy cried out for salvation, whining that Vanessa was trying to bleed him dry. But Gizlin's concern was only for her, asking if she had recovered from her first taste of true battle. Alfoy shouted in outrage, "Hey, are you just going to ignore me?" Even Gizlin threw in a backhanded compliment, shocked to see the wizard actually putting in some effort. But Alfoy just grumbled, yearning for the solitude of his tower. Gizlin simply replied that he was coming along for the ride. Later, amidst the chaos of Austin Territo's gaming hall, Alfoy questioned their detour from the magic tower. Gizlin just smirked, promising a little fun.
Cao, flashing a wicked grin, provoked the wizard, taunting that for all his magic, he knew nothing about how the real world turns.
Their goal: to turn money into even more money. When Belinda asked if Gizlin was also there to play his denial, was swift and cold. He was on a mission to recruit a new talent for his territory. He revealed their target was trapped in this gambling den by a twisted past, and they had to get him out before disaster struck. Belinda found it strange recruiting someone from a place like this. Gizlin admitted his options were limited, but assured her the man was worth it. His name was Claude. Suddenly, a roar erupted from upstairs, accusing a man of scheming again, simply because he'd studied at the academy. They were threatening to chop off his hand. The bald owner of the hall accused him of swapping the dice, of cheating the regulars out of their hard-earned coin. Claude desperately denied the accusation. He swore he never touched the house dice, claiming they were the ones setting him up. But the owner just sneered callously, telling him not to get his feelings hurt. In this den of vipers, an honest man's word was worth less than dust. But just as the blade was about to fall, a hand shot out like lightning, stopping it cold. It was Gizlin, his voice cutting through the tension. "This game looks interesting. I'm in." He announced his presence with authority. "I am Gizlin from the Kingdom of Ludania, the current Baron of Fenris, a foreign noble." The owner's eyes narrowed. His guards lunged forward, but he barked a single command for them to halt. He then snarled, asking why a baron would grace his filthy establishment. Gizlin's gaze was like steel. "I'm looking for someone who is right here." He then ordered Claude to get on his feet, declaring he had come to take him home. Meanwhile, downstairs, Cao and Alfoy were in another world entirely. The wizard was on an unbelievable hot streak, a mountain of chips piled before him. It was as if Lady Luck herself was on his side. Cao could only stare in awe at Alfoy's uncanny gift. The wizard himself mused that a lifetime of selling scrolls couldn't compare to this one night. His heart had never pounded with such thrilling excitement. Just then, chaos erupted from the floor above. Belinda knew at once that must be their target, B. The bald owner sneered, claiming that taking the man wouldn't be so easy. In his house, every player must pay their debts.
Gizlin turned to Claude, his voice low. "Did you cheat seizing this sliver of hope?" Claude profusely apologized to the Baron for the trouble.
He explained the whole setup, how constant inspections found nothing but the moment he started winning. A loaded die magically appeared, and all the blame was pinned on him. Belinda seethed at the injustice. Gizlin simply asked, "Is that true?" The owner just laughed. "Their relationship doesn't matter. Are you really going to trust the words of a common cheater?" He then issued a dark warning. Even for a noble, interfering now could cause serious diplomatic problems. He advised Gizlin to walk away and forget what he saw. But Gizlin flatly refused. He proposed a way to settle everything with a simple game. If Gizlin won, he would take Claude and clear his debt. If he lost, the entire hall held its breath. Belinda gasped. "Are you insane?" Claude could only thank him for this incredible gamble. But Gizlin's resolve was iron. He needed this man no matter the price. The bald man grinned. "It's been ages since I met a noble with such courage." He accepted the challenge. "If you step into this casino, you have to play." A palpable tension gripped the venue as the news spread like wildfire. A noble was about to challenge the master of the house. The rules were brutally simple. Whoever rolled the lowest number would be the winner. In case of a tie, they'd roll again. A game for men who despised complications. Gizlin simply agreed. The owner went first. With a series of exaggerated theatrical moves, he put on a grand show, a ceremony of chance. Finally, he slammed the cup on the table. The result, a single point. It was impossible to roll any lower. A murmur swept the crowd. The rich noble had already lost. Despair washed over Belinda and Claude's faces. The owner scoffed that luck was on his side, but Gizlin silenced him with a calm gesture. The owner knew it was a bluff. The noble could hide his panic all he wanted, but inside he had to be dying. Anything he did now was utterly useless. Of course, the owner had cheated from the very beginning. He used a custom cup with a hidden bottom.
A flick of the wrist was all it took to swap in a loaded die with the shake serving as the perfect misdirection.
It was a flawless technique, a trick that had never failed. He was invincible. But in that instant, Gizlin focused his power. A wave of pure aura surged from his hand, secretly enveloping the die inside the cup. He asked coolly, "The one with the lowest number wins, don't they?" Then he lifted the cup. Underneath, the die had been completely obliterated, turned into nothing but fine dust. The owner stared in absolute shock. What just happened? The crowd erupted in chaos. Had he really just pulverized a solid die into powder? The manager shrieked that it was a trick, but Gizlin snatched his hand in an iron grip. "What's this you're hiding?" It was the modified die. Gizlin smirked coldly. "Games of chance are sacred," he mocked, "and cheaters will not be tolerated." The manager's mind raced. How could he possibly know? In a last-ditch effort, the manager lunged, but the noble dodged with contemptuous ease. "You should have been honest from the start." Gizlin spat on Crank's pathetic hypocrisy. Seething with pure rage, the manager declared, "You've only just arrived, and you're already a thorn in my side. I guarantee you will not leave this place alive." As the guards swarmed forward, Gizlin didn't even break a sweat. He used his own men as a springboard, launching himself toward his target. In a flash, his blade was at Crank's throat. The casino boss was completely subdued. The mercenary coward scoffed. They should learn to choose their enemies more wisely. Belinda looked to her leader. "What do we do now?" Gizlin's voice rang out for all to hear. "As per our agreement, I declare that Crank, manager and administrator of Baron Austin's main casino, has been caught red-handed trying to cheat a foreign noble. The fate of a casino that has lost its honor is sealed. Try to reverse what happened," he warned, "and you will all die." But as his chilling warning echoed through the hall, Gizlin realized that Claude had vanished. Belinda was outraged. That rat didn't just run, he took all the money, and that's the thanks we get for saving his arm. Kior guessed the runaway gambler would hide in another casino. Belinda was ready to scour the entire area, but Gizlin held up a hand. "That won't be necessary. I know exactly where he's gone." Meanwhile, Claude thought he'd made a clean escape. Who was that noble? And why had he offered his help? But none of it mattered. He had the money. He had to leave now as his life depended on it. He remembered a year ago telling Anna his discovery. Gambling was never about luck. She had pleaded with him to stop. She reminded him of his master's death, her own father. But Claude insisted, "It was all my fault. My foolishness and my weakness turned my master into a traitor." And because of that failure, Anna Aris, his master's daughter, was taken as collateral. The man who took her gave him 1 year. 1 year to bring 2,000 gold coins and win her freedom. Now Claude raced to save her. Later at Austin Castle, the Baron was in a foul mood as usual. "The dungeons are too crowded. Execute all the prisoners." A knight stepped forward. "My lord, it has been almost a year since the traitor's daughter was captured." "Is there any news of Claude?" The Baron scoffed. "I hear he's wasting his life in casinos winning nothing." "It seems Crank is handling that fool perfectly." He continued, a cruel smile on his face. "If she weren't a traitor's daughter, I might even have used her as a maid, but my conscience prevents me. So execute her along with the others." The knight questioned, "But what if the scoundrel actually brings the ransom?" The Baron's eyes gleamed with greed. "We will take the money, and then dispose of her in secret. No one will care about one dead casino gambler." Just then, a messenger burst into the hall. "My Lord Claude has arrived. He has the money." Claude slammed 2,000 coins onto the table. "I've brought every last coin. Now release Anna immediately." The Baron confirmed the gold was real. "I won it in a bet," Claude stated proudly. "Arrest him," the Baron roared. "The source of this money is suspicious." In an instant, the guard seized him. "I'll confirm your story with Crank," the Baron sneered. "Stay quiet in your cell if you don't want to be executed." Claude thrashed, yelling, "This is ridiculous. I'll kill you, you bastard." Suddenly, the doors were thrown open. A figure moved like lightning, taking down 2 guards. "I am Gizlin Perium, Baron of Fenris, from the Kingdom of Ludania, and I have Crank in my custody." With breathtaking arrogance, Gizlin sat and propped his feet on the table. "Insolent cur!" a knight yelled, demanding respect. In a flash, Cow's blade was drawn. "Do you want to complicate things?" The Baron fumed. "I will not tolerate such behavior." Gizlin replied coolly. "This isn't insolence. I am here for compensation." He grabbed Crank's chin, forcing eye contact. "This man," he explained, "almost caused me and Claude to lose our entire fortunes." "They cheated?" Crank cried out, but Belinda just laughed. "That bald liar only knows how to spew nonsense." The Baron cursed Crank's incompetence internally. He glared at Gizlin. "What do you want?" The noble's eyes were like steel. "Your casino owes both me and Claude fair compensation." The Baron tried to deflect. "I cannot confirm Crank's actions." Gizlin's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Oh, this absolutely concerns you." "I will spread rumors of cheating," he threatened. "How will you handle all the nobles you have swindled?" The Baron's face went pale. "Are you blackmailing me?" I want double the amount on this table. Claude stared in stunned silence. Gizlin gave him one last chance to walk away, and it would be like this never happened. But the Baron exploded, calling Claude a miserable traitor for bringing a foreign noble to rob him blind.
Cal just grinned, whispering that the best part was just getting started. Belinda laughed, joking it almost looked like they'd staged the entire confrontation.
Gizlin then casually accepted a dagger from Belinda. The Baron threatened to slaughter everyone to erase all evidence, but Gizlin was a blur of motion. He slammed a heavy money bag straight into the Baron's face as Cal and Belinda intercepted the guards in a flash. Gizlin's order was cold and clear. Take them down, but don't kill them. In mere moments, the knights were completely overwhelmed, and Gizlin himself dropped the Baron's personal guard with a single precise blow to the neck. Watching the chaos unfold, Claude could only stare in shock. Who were these people, and why on earth were they doing this for him? He recalled Gizlin's words that he needed him at all costs, but he knew no one offered kindness without a price. The wounded Baron roared, "How dare you harm a nobleman?" Gizlin simply reaffirmed his position. "I'm taking the money and Anna." He scanned the room. "Are there any objections?" Claude played along, daring the Baron to argue. But later he confessed the truth. He believed Anna would find more peace in her homeland than beside him, the man who caused her father's death. In Gizlin's mind, his debt to Claude was finally paid. The chains of his past life were now broken. He turned to Claude. "So what do you think of this place?" Claude was brutally honest. "It's a wasteland. Given the chance, I'd slit the Lord's throat myself. It looks pathetically easy to conquer." Gizlin's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I cut my own throat?" The shocking truth hit Claude. You're the lord of this territory." In an instant, Gizlin's hand gripped his neck. "That's right, and you'll pay your debt by fixing every last thing you just insulted." Claude frantically tried to backtrack, but Gizlin's voice was final. "It's too late." Meanwhile, Desmond watched Gizlin's plans from afar, his fury boiling over. He gave a swift command. "Send the letter to Amelia. We're accelerating the plan." Later at Fenris Castle, the team gathered to begin their monumental task. The so-called liberated domain was an absolute wreck. Gizlin immediately burdened Claude with a mountain of administrative roles, all to normalize the territory, starting with a plan to plant crops. Claude stared at the parched, cracked earth in disbelief. "You're actually going to plant something in these dead fields?" "We are," Gizlin confirmed, his vision unshakable. "We'll use the blood python's bones for fertilizer, renovate the old facilities, and build new crystal warehouses." "Are you joking?" Claude sputtered. "Administrator, supervisor, and secretary." He railed against this crushing workload, but Gizlin just told him to hire people if he needed to. Claude tried to make a run for it, but was instantly captured by razor-sharp threads wielded by a new-face Wendy. She had been assigned as his personal guard. Defeated, Claude could only cry for help. In his past life, he knew a noble's duty was to protect their people. The commoner's distrust was a wound inflicted by generations of greedy lords. Gizlin had to solve the most basic problems first. But they were completely broke. At this rate, in 3 months, he couldn't even afford to pay salaries. Cow suggested selling their precious runestones, but Gizlin refused. They needed those to fund critical research. They desperately needed a sustainable income. Just then, Claude burst in. Belinda immediately told Wendy, "Hit him first, ask questions later." Claude shouted that they couldn't possibly plant anything, a sentiment Alfoy strongly agreed with. "We'll worry about that later," Gizlin dismissed. He explained that building a casino now would be a weak foundation, making them vulnerable to Desmond down the line. "We won't have any food by then," Claude argued back. But Gizlin made an impossible vow he would solve the food problem by making this wasteland bloom. Seeing the doubt in their eyes, he proposed a bet. 3 months later, a miracle stood before them, a massive field of wheat with enough food for everyone. A dumbfounded Claude asked how he did it. Gizlin finally revealed his secret. "We spread nutrient-rich blood python bone powder, then planted rye strengthened by mana concentration seals. They accelerated growth by drawing power from the runstones." It was a secret method he'd brought back with him, proven by the mages of the future. The people erupted in celebration. Gizlin then went to collect his winnings from Claude and Alfoy. If they had won, they'd have gotten 5,000 gold and their freedom. But since they lost, they were now his unpaid slaves for the next 10 years. The look on their faces said it all: they were doomed. With the food crisis averted, the runestones were free for other projects. That's when Rupert from the Magic Tower arrived. Gizlin immediately spoke of defending Fenris from future attacks. Rupert sighed, asking why he always thought in extremes. Unfazed, Gizlin requested more mages to establish a new branch. The mages were put to work on a grand scale, using their magic to dig dwellings and carve out canals. They were building the Fenris branch of the Crimson Flame Magic Tower. Though the people were wary at first, Fenris began to recover at an incredible pace. However, Claude delivered a chilling warning from Riffold. It seemed Amelia had already started preparing for war. Gizlin knew this was happening much faster than in his past life. His interference had changed the timeline. With Desmond and Amelia acting as Duke Delphin's puppets, his war was far from over. So what did you think of this incredible story? Drop a comment and leave a rating from 0 to 10. I'm really eager to know your thoughts.